Hello and welcome to Global South Rising, where we break down the weekly news from around the world through an anti-imperialist lens. Every week on Friday, 9 a.m. BRT, 12 p.m. UTC, and 8 p.m. Beijing time, we dismantle imperial narratives with analysis, opinion, and in-depth discussion on the challenges, achievements, and contradictions of building a new multilateral world. I'm Ileana Chan, here with my co-host, Sara Vivacqua, and our special guest today, Xiangyu. Welcome, Xiangyu, to Global South Rising.
Thank you very much for having me on again. I know it's been a while. I had some difficulty scheduling this appearance, but I'm glad I could finally make it on.
Yes, we're really excited and glad you're here too. So this week we will be covering with Xiangyu all things Taiwan, China, and the U.S. escalations or de-escalations in the South China Sea. Lots of shifting of geopolitical maneuvering happening there. And then João will be on, João Amorim will be on the second half of the show to cover the Oscars as part of the pillar of U.S. soft power. Is it still a cultural gatekeeper? Then Sara will be talking about the Global South fighting back with the ICJ, which I'm really excited to hear about. And of course, I will be talking about the third anniversary of China's Global Civilization Initiative. So stick around for that. But we are starting with Xiangyu. So I'm just going to read Xiangyu's bio here. Xiangyu is an anti-imperialist rapper and political commentator based in Taiwan, China. He is the host of Strait Talk. We have put the links below, so please check that out. It's a YouTube show and podcast which provides a deep dive into the Taiwan Strait, which he describes as a pivotal battleground between Western hegemony and Eastern resistance. That's very, very true and insightful. Welcome, Xiangyu. So I guess we can just get right into it. Should we just get right into it? Although, can I just say hello to some of our commenters?
I think I would like to know a little bit, what is a Marxist rapper and how he began his career before we start with our interview.
Good question.
I haven't answered this question in a pretty long time. Well, I think from an outsider looking in, it might be like, oh, if Taiwan is a certain way, why would somebody be like a communist or anything like that? But I mean, like anywhere else in the world, the situation is very complicated. And I think there is this understanding of Taiwan in many parts of the world that kind of just begins and ends in 1949. I believe a lot of people's understanding of Taiwan is like, okay, Chiang Kai-shek lost the Chinese Civil War and Taiwan was all he had left. So he and the remnants of the Republican government just retreated here. But I think that does a huge injustice, not just to the history of Taiwan, but the history of the rest of China. And if there is this understanding where it's like Taiwan was not really relevant until 1949, then we have to ask, why did Japan want to take this island from China in the first place? And why was it so hell-bent on forcing China under the Qing government to forfeit Taiwan and give it to Japan, and for it to become Japan's first ever colony and its model colony? So I think if you really want to better understand this region, not just China, but I mean, you look at like Japan, for example, Japanese imperialism, Taiwan really has been a battleground of sorts for many years. I mean, it's been under, certain parts of it have been under Dutch occupation, Dutch colonial rule. The Spanish tried to have a little stronghold before they were kicked out. They didn't really get much of a stronghold. They couldn't even collect taxes. And I mean, it's also just its geopolitical location, the fact that it existed on the periphery, on the frontier of China. So, I mean, given all of this history that's gone on, there's going to be people of various stripes. It's not like this island was barren until the KMT came. In fact, the island was already highly populated. By the time there ever even was a KMT, it was already a part of Chinese civilization before there ever was a KMT or even a Communist Party of China. And of course, I mean, there was White Terror, and communists and their suspected sympathizers were, have brutally oppressed, but also anyone that challenged the KMT's rule, including certain liberals and Taiwan separatists were also, so I mean, is it that strange that given all of the history that's happened over here, that somebody from this background would have a path of political development that leads him to this sort of anti-imperialism?
I love that. And I think you're right, like Xiangyu, that would be the rational perspective to have.
Right.
However, we do also have to acknowledge it's not it's not as common as we would like, right?
Of course. And that's fine. It's like I think people have this understanding, for example, of Korea, where it's like the people of either North or South Korea did not ask for the situation to be this way. They were just ordinary people caught up in extraordinary times with their national fate decided, unfortunately, by forces outside of their control. And if we can understand China, the two sides of the Taiwan Strait, with the same perspective, I think it puts a lot of things into perspective.
Well, we all suffer a lot of bad education about other cultures. So in Brazil, for many people, they think we speak Spanish and eat bananas and live on trees, and we don't have elevators and stuff about everything too.
Right. Yeah, that's true. I do feel like, Brazil is like famous for bikinis and football. I think that's
true.
That's true.
Partially true, not the whole truth.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about I think one of the things that we've heard about Taiwan. I don't know if you've heard this, Sara, but this description of Taiwan is like an unsinkable battleship for the US.
Oh yeah.
Right. So now we're sort of seeing, and as I said in the introduction, there are shifts happening that are very interesting, probably because of the Iran war. And I mean, so many things to reach to this point. But, with the latest national security strategy that dropped, that one dropped, I think, the end of last year. Political pundits really claimed that it was evidence that Trump's foreign policy was taking a step back from escalations against China and refocusing on Latin America and Iran. Now, we certainly have seen the refocus to Latin America and Iran. However, we also, at the same time, are seeing aggressive military escalations against China through a buildup in Taiwan. So for this first thing, Xiangyu, could you actually help us unpack? I'm going to show this. Yeah. So just help us unpack the US $14 billion arms deal that's supposed to be signed next week. And also new reports coming out that apparently there are US intelligence reports coming out that are saying that they are now reversing their assessment that China will invade, in quotation marks for people who are listening, Taiwan in 2027. As we know, Sara, we've covered on this show quite a few times, really, that think tanks from the US have put 2027 as the year that the US needs to have a war with China, because past 2027, they believe China will have surpassed the US in every measure, so they will have no chance to take down China. So they've really put that 2027 year in the think tank strategies. But now US intelligence is apparently reversing course. So what does that mean, Xiangyu? What do you think that means, Xiangyu, for this US $14 billion arms? So just generally sort of the positioning of Taiwan right now.
So I think I want to speak about the internal politics of the arms deal first. They started discussing, it was a huge controversy over here in the island towards the end of last year. And I mean, back then there was also this proposed special budget of close to 14 billion. This is kind of something else, of a special defense budget. And it gained a lot of controversy because if you want to spend people's tax dollars on something this huge, you need an explanation, right?
Yeah, and also just remembering that Taiwan only has 24 million people, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
the
yeah.
population, it's a small well, it's not even a country really.
It's a small
But
population.
yeah, it's a very small population. So for $40 billion in extra defense spending for 24 million people. Yeah, it's absolutely
Yeah.
crazy.
And you know how, and these things need to be approved by the legislative body. And guess what the Lai Ching-te administration provided to them?
What did they say?
2 sheets of A4 paper. I mean, for 40 billion, you think 2 sheets of A4 paper are sufficient to, justify any sort of not just defense spending, even if it's just a $1 million thing for whatever. The people, the legislators elected by the people deserve to have more information, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it didn't win in parliament, right?
Oh yeah, the DPP right now it's stuck in the situation where they are the minority in the parliament. They have 51 out of 113 seats, with 52 being part of the KMT, 8 of them being the Taiwan People's Party, the new third party, and then 2 more of going to those without party affiliation, but they're kind of more aligned with the KMT. So you're looking at sorry?
So in the lack of explanation, what is this money really for? What would you say?
Oh,
because certainly the real explanation is not on those 2 sheets.
It's protection money. I mean, Taiwan every year we spend like upwards of like billions on weapons, but their delivery schedule is like you buy now and you get the goods in like a few years, or you're supposed to, but then oftentimes they're late, they're overpriced, they're outdated, and then here's the thing. If anything happens in, say, like the Philippines, the US, it's done this before, where it's like, oh, you bought this equipment from us, this Abrams tank or whatever, for this amount of money. Well, I'm telling you right now, you got to sell it for cheap to the Philippines because they need it. So,
Right.
I mean,
Interesting.
it's kind of
Well,
like you look at THAAD in South Korea. It's like
Right.
President Lee Jae-myung said it well. He said, well, you guys didn't ask us for permission when you put it here, and you also didn't ask for permission when you took it away.
Yeah, exactly. They've moved the THAAD missile, maybe not the whole thing, but the system, components of the system, to West Asia to help with Iran, apparently. But the other thing too is that, when I was talking to KJ No about this on Global Majority for Peace, he kind of talked about it as like a tributary system versus a protectionist. It's really because it's the protectionist thing. Obviously, why would Taiwan need protection from China that considers Taiwan part of its country? Like, it's not protection. You wouldn't need that if it wasn't for these escalations anyway. So it is more like a tributary system, or a teeth, like a tithe. How do you say that word?
And it also goes to show what the US needs those places for. To increase the military budget of their own country, to renew their economical cycles, to war, and to launder money.
Exactly.
It's probably their private money laundering, as many of the US military bases, with no control whatsoever, a lot of trafficking of a lot of things, goes through those US bases and the military. So the military is a big black box where you have a lot of crimes going on in an undercover way. So probably Taiwan has this very interesting role, and so close to China, so close to dear friends Japanese.
Thankfully, there are no US military bases in Taiwan and haven't been since 1979. But of course, that does not mean military cooperation still isn't going on. They do things like they'll temporarily remove their titles and then come as individuals and give advice or whatever. During my conscription, I wasn't in the military. I was in the fire service. But even then, like, because civil defense involves the fire service, every now and then at the training center, we would see U.S. soldiers just coming and having meetings with certain officers, and then they were like, don't take photographs, don't tell people outside. And it's just like, bro, everybody knows. It's an open secret. But
Yeah, they have permanent troops stationed there. US has permanent troops stationed in Taiwan. And I wonder if this lack of a military base is because of it's not strategic ambiguity. They pretend that it's strategic ambiguity with the US in terms of China and Taiwan. But I just wonder if that was in the past, it would just cross this incredible line, because it would suggest that the US has invaded China. Like if they put a military installation.
Ileana, sorry to interrupt. John wants to know when he has to come in.
Okay. I mean, he can come in at 10 minutes after if he wants.
yeah. So I mean, the name of the game over here in Taiwan is the US wants sufficient tension so that it can justify more weapon sales, but it doesn't want to escalate things to the point where, reunification happens and then the PLA wins, because then the game kind of ends, because right now it's like, okay, escalation, someone back up, but then you can justify more weapon sales, the military industrial complex makes money, and then politicians get kickbacks, and then whoever is incumbent, if they like them, they can project this image of being tough on the mainland. And that's kind of the situation right now. And I think right now is especially pertinent for the incumbent, the ruling party, the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, because Lai Ching-te, our current leader, is incredibly unpopular right now. He was elected with just 40% of the vote. If you count abstentions, 30. And during his first 2 years of his leadership, what has he done for the people? Nothing. There's no 政绩. He has no accomplishments that he can really boast or show to the people. He has no, and in addition to that, he basically spat in the face of the very same democratic system that his party once fought for. He wasn't happy with the fact that the DPP only occupied 51 out of 113 seats in the legislature. So he launches a mass recall. Usually a recall in parliament, it's if a particular politician fails to perform his or her duties, you use a recall to remove the unfit person, right? You don't launch a recall by saying, hey, I don't like the fact that the other party has the majority, so I want to get rid of them. That's you don't use a recall like that.
You have to give a pretext. You have to give some sort of pretext, whether it's made up or not.
Oh, the pretext was simple. It was that the KMT and the TPP are all puppets of the CPC, and that it's a national security risk.
Wow. Okay, yeah. This is the thing that's very interesting right now about Taiwan, right? Because like about a week ago, there were all these reports about, the military exercises from China, the jets that were flying around Taiwan, very, very threatening, very scary. And then like this week, they're literally like, okay, but actually US intelligence says that China is not going to invade Taiwan. So like, you have like this, like you're saying, this back and forth about China is infiltrating Taiwan or invading Taiwan. China said over and over again, and you've made this point on our show on the Global Majority for Peace, that both China and Taiwan acknowledge the peaceful reunification by like 2049. Isn't it 2049 or something?
First thing, we should refer to the two sides of the strait as mainland China and Taiwan, and not China and Taiwan. And the 2049 thing is really coming from Beijing. Beijing's the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949. So like as part of the goal of national rejuvenation and restoring the dignity of the Chinese people, it would like to see the reunification of the country by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the founding, because the perspective is the situation of Taiwan today is a reminder of the century of humiliation. Like, why did Taiwan get separated initially in the first place? It was because China was too weak to fight off the Japanese during the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895. And then, after the Chinese Civil War, 1949, it was in a state of, internal division that foreign powers to this day are seeking to exploit, to use China's Taiwan region as a wedge against the rest of the country. So, yeah. Now, internally in Taiwan, it's very complicated because our laws, the laws of the so-called Republic of China do not state that Taiwan is a separate country. In fact, if you look at the laws of the so-called Republic of China, particularly the additional articles of the Constitution as well as the Strait Act, it defines both the mainland and Taiwan as two regions of the so-called Republic of China. Now, to some outside observers, they'll be like, "Oh, this is aggression because it's Taipei claiming to have claiming sovereignty over the mainland." But no, if you look into it, this is really a point of unity legally between the two sides, which is we agree that it is one country, but that we interpret this reality differently. Now, of course, what complicates this is the fact that in Taiwan, you have a force called the Taiwan Separatists, and they would like nothing more than to remove these claims from the so-called ROC Constitution. In fact, deep down, they want to get rid of the so-called Republic of China completely and establish a Republic of Taiwan. But because of the legal framework, the two sides are, whether those people like it or not, are bound to one another. And the reason why the Communist Party and the KMT had a working relationship was because in 1992, representatives from the two sides agreed in a very vague way that two sides belong to one country. China is one country. They just didn't get into defining what China was. And they also said that both sides will work towards reunification, but in a vague way without really defining a timetable. So because of the lack of a timetable, this 2027 figure is completely it's wishful thinking and fabricated by outside forces. Now, Beijing will constantly reiterate, we will not rule out the use of force. But this does not mean that the use of force is preferred. In fact, it is the last resort that Beijing wants to pursue, especially after the normalization between cross-strait relations ever since the late 1980s. But yeah, I mean, legally over here, Taiwan separatism goes against the laws that govern Taiwan, not, mind you, not the laws of Beijing, the laws of Taipei. But there's other factors in here, like the current leader Lai Ching-te. He just likes to pretend that these laws don't exist.
Well, I mean, I think before we get into Lai Ching-te, because I think he's quite an interesting figure. He's very, very blatant, in fact, in his obsequiousness to the U.S. I wanted to ask you, and Japan, yeah. I wanted to ask you about the Taiwanese independent separatist. I am having trouble putting this on. Let me try to figure out how. Okay, there you go. So yeah, so this Taiwan independent separatist activities and political manipulation are futile. This is a statement from the Chinese Ministry of National Defense. And they say here, this is in response to the goodwill cruising and training squadron of Taiwan's naval force that has set sail to visit its so-called diplomatic allies in Central and South America for a large-scale goodwill mission. Jiang Ben, the Ministry of National Defense spokesperson, said the so-called goodwill mission is merely an excuse for the DPP authorities to solicit foreign support for Taiwan independence. So this is sort of like the context for what I think my interpretation of the U.S. trying to, again, like bolster this Taiwan independence movement. You sort of talked about it a little bit just then, Xiangyu, but can you sort of explain a little bit more about what, they're obviously counter to the Constitution, as you're saying.
Yes.
So like what is, what are they actually doing? How much of a real presence are they in Taiwan? Etc. Like, what does the public's also response?
Well, if you've like you said, if you've been following me and listening to my show, then you'll know that I do have it's not really controversial, but I do like to, it's kind of a hot take, which is Taiwan separatism is not real in the sense that it is a real movement that people are willing to risk their lives for. And the US, in fact, does not support Taiwan separatism. It does, but it doesn't, and I'll get into that. Taiwan separatism, at its very beginning, and even to this day, it's just a political tool of a certain segment of elites in Taiwan and of U.S. geopolitical interests. But before we get into that, I want to ask you this. Back then, when the U.S. supported Chiang Kai-shek, right? Chiang Kai-shek was against Taiwan separatism, but he also wanted to recapture the mainland and restore the Republic of China. Did the U.S. support him to that extent, or they just supported him because he kept Taiwan free from communist rule? Can you what are your idea? What are your thoughts on this?
So my thought, and then Sara can maybe weigh in on what her impression is of this. My thought about this is that it is very much part of the Washington anti-communist Cold War situation. So there's like gonna be players all across the world that they kind of would back and support depending on that.
Yeah, but did they support Chiang Kai-shek's goal of launching a counterattack on the mainland and taking it back over?
No, I don't think.
Yeah, and you know why?
They could. Can they? Because wouldn't that be ridiculous to even attempt?
Well, I mean, let's just say it was possible. There's also the possibility of it backfiring. And what the U.S. wanted, because there is something called the First Island Chain, which goes from like the north, like, Aleutian Islands through Japan, down to Okinawa or like Ryukyu, through Taiwan, the Philippines and some of the islands over there, down to Southeast Asia. And this island chain forms a natural naval blockade against not just China, the Chinese mainland, but also Russia, the Eurasian continent. And at that point, the U.S. priority, and this gets into the whole the saying of Taiwan being the unsinkable aircraft carrier, which is, okay, the U.S. was upset that the KMT managed to lose the mainland because its designs for the region were thrown off. But now it's like, okay, we absolutely cannot risk Taiwan being lost to the communists, because if you look at the island chain, Taiwan is the biggest link. It's right. It's a central location. Should it be reunified with the rest of China, then the whole island chain is broken. If you look at it from this perspective, then you can see that today the U.S. does not support full-on Taiwan separatism because it does not want people like Lai Ching-te to declare Taiwan as an independent country, because doing so would again risk a conflict that could, just break the island chain. Because I mean, it will break the island chain because the Taiwan is not in a situation. It's not at a capacity where it could defeat an attack by the People's Liberation Army. But the U.S. does support Taiwan separatism in one sense, which is it supports the ideology spreading enough to make peaceful reunification difficult.
Right.
That's what you really need to understand. And that's why the mainland authorities, the PLA, the Ministry of National Defense, will speak against ideological Taiwan separatism. And sometimes their words make it seem like they're taking Taiwan separatism as a real threat. They are, but they aren't. They understand what the DPP is doing. They understand what America is doing. They know Taiwan separatism will not happen, but they would like to prevent the further spread of this ideology, especially to these countries in Latin America, Central America, and those Pacific islands. Yeah.
So it's more like, go ahead.
So what you're saying is that Taiwan is a way to antagonize with China. They don't really want Taiwan as an independent country where they would mind control less than now. But my question to you, like, separatism doesn't need to have a military solution. It can be a constitutional separation. If
the U.S. has actively prevented that from happening on multiple occasions.
Yeah, can you explain how? Because this is quite telling. Most of countries, let's say Catalonia, what they want is a separatism through constitutional change. So why is the West preventing it? How they are preventing it?
Oh, well, again, it goes back to the regional stability. It understands Beijing's position that this is an internal matter and that it will resort to the use of force should separatism or moves towards separatism be declared. And the way that constitutional separatism in Taiwan would happen would be the either there's multiple ways. One of them is to legally redefine the so-called Republic of China's territories to just Taiwan, Penghu, Jimen, Mazu, the areas under Taipei's effective control, while removing the Chinese mainland from the map, because that would signal, okay, that's two Chinas. We are the Republic of China. You are the People's Republic of China. That's one form of separatism. The other is the more hardline separatism, which is we abolish the so-called Republic of China altogether, and in its place, we establish a Republic of Taiwan. And neither solution the U.S. is cool with, because it will provoke a conflict, and such a conflict is unwinnable. And if the U.S. commits to it, which defending Taiwan, which it never has, by the way, it's never committed to defending Taiwan. It's always just said we will observe carefully, which could mean just thoughts and prayers. It's basically what happened in Ukraine. Like, conflict broke out, and has the U.S. provided any like military support? No. So it's
Yeah, just to further along this question, because it's a really good question, Sarah.
Yeah.
I just want to sort of read it in my mind, pragmatically, realistically, tangibly on the ground. The reason why it can't be like a completely separate independent country is because of the US. Like, the US wanting to use this area as their unsinkable battleship means that they cannot be put in that position, because then it would just go towards the US. Like, it's in this imperialist world.
You have to maintain the situationship.
Yeah, there is no sovereign country because of US imperialism in this particular paradigm, right? But
yes.
If we were to look at the actual constitution, like you're saying, Taiwan does have a different constitution than mainland China, and they do have different governing bodies. So what actually would be the difference, apart from the idea that one day they will like sort of come to, because they could, if without US interference, it could still be one country with there's like special trade agreements between like Taiwan and China, but they still can maintain their separate governments, and that it, like, in theory, it would just be like a strengthening of ties, but it doesn't have to be like the either or, but the US is kind of insisting on that.
Well, I think from the perspective of the Chinese people, the fact that this Chinese Civil War never ended in a peace treaty. It just ended with, okay, the KMT lost the mainland. They still have Taiwan. We will take care of it at some point. When two governments claim the same territories, right, but administer different parts of the territories, that means it's still in a state of civil war, even if the active fighting hasn't ended. So yeah, that's the difference. Unless like some sort of peace treaty is signed and two countries are recognized, it just can't happen.
Yeah, I mean, but in essence, the situationship, like you're saying, can just...
So the happy medium would be the special administrative regions of Hong Kong and Macau.
Yes, exactly.
That was this essay. The whole one country, two systems thing was designed initially for Taiwan. It just happened that Hong Kong was handed back before the Taiwan issue could be resolved. And it's basically, okay, the existing system we keep. It's just that issues of national defense and foreign relations go to Beijing, but everything else, the status quo inside the island, all the same. Well, of course, it becomes what the governing body that is currently called the so-called Republic of China gets renamed to the Taiwan Special Administrative Region, and relevant governing bodies would be renamed, but functionally they would be the same. Yeah, it's a matter of national dignity and sovereignty at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, and because just before I go back to Sara on this, like, because of US interference that happened with Hong Kong, with the Color Revolution that was staged by the US in Hong Kong that required China to have to strengthen their ties and, you know, introduce the different sort of initiatives to protect Hong Kong from U.S. foreign interference. If the U.S. just effed off, then they could have that two governments, one country thing pretty like peacefully, and it would be fine. Like there are loads and loads of benefits for Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau to have strong ties with China. There's really, you know, the only downsides are like U.S. influence downsides, really, at this point.
And do you want to know the thing?
What?
That's exactly the situation right now. Like Taiwan right now, it's if ties between Taiwan and the mainland are severed. I mean, here's the thing: people look at things through like the news media, the headlines, and they think that cross-strait relations are like relations between North and South Korea. But the fact is, so much trade happens. They're our largest trading partner. So much exchange, travel between the two sides. Well, right now the travel across the strait is one-sided for, you know, for reasons. But it's at the point where even the DPP administration can't just sever ties with the mainland because there's so many, you know, Taiwan businesses on the mainland, Taiwan students on the mainland, people in Taiwan working on the mainland, whether for like Taiwan companies or mainland companies. Reunification it's a long process, and the reason why people are now so like people opposing reunification are so loud nowadays is because they see it too. It's a process that's begun in the 1980s, and, you know, first it comes through people to people contact, then there's trade, then there's just everything else in our daily lives. I mean, even in Taiwan today, the pop culture references, so much of it comes from the mainland. When people swipe on TikTok, a lot of it is just re-uploaded stuff from the mainland. It's
Does that answer your question, Sarah? I'm like, how are you feeling about it?
I'm muting because I have drums right across my home here. Can you hear this?
No,
I can't actually. Your noise cancellation is good.
They have drums here. Yeah, it does. I think maybe I'm wrong, but it does show that this is not organic movement, because when this is an organic movement, people will press for a constitutional change, right? And as China rises as economic power, why do I want not to belong to this economic prosperity? So you need to that's how I interpret the situation. But yeah, that does answer my question. Thank you.
I have one thing I want to add though, because there's many layers to Taiwan separatism, and if you look at the history of Taiwan separatism, it began not as opposition towards the Communist Party of China, but against the government in Taiwan, the KMT government. Do you want me to elaborate on that? Because I know that might sound confusing.
Yeah, yes, please elaborate on that, because I think people really don't understand that part. Yeah,
I'm going to introduce a concept to some of the audience members. Those who listen to me, I feel like might feel like I'm being a broken record, but Taiwan, the population can largely be divided into two categories. One is called 本省人, and 本省人 means people of this province, and it refers to people whose families already had roots on this island by the time the KMT arrived in 1945. Now, most 本省人 are also Han. I mean, there's also an indigenous population. They're like 2%. But by the time the KMT even existed, Taiwan was already majority Han. So, like, a lot of this identity politics, like, issues in Taiwan, it's not even like Han versus not Han. It's within different subsets of Han people. And then there's another group of people called 外省人. 外省人 means people from outside of this province. So you're thinking of people who arrived from the mainland to Taiwan starting in 1945 until I'd say the mid-1950s, with most of them arriving in 1949. Now, regardless of which group, right, the majority back then, they were poor. There were poor peasants of 本省人 and 外省人. A lot of them were like just poor soldiers that happened to be in the military and ended up over here. But here's the thing. When Japan ruled Taiwan, think of it as the mafia. You have like the Don, right? And then you have multiple capital regimes that like control their little streets and everything. So the way the Japanese governed Taiwan was there already was an existing landed aristocracy that had a lot of power in rural areas. So they just bought them off and then had those people govern, the rural areas, govern the peasants, right? So these people were very powerful in Taiwan. When the KMT came, I mean, they were just like, well, we learned some difficult lessons on the mainland. We don't want a bunch of angry peasants overthrowing us again. So we're going to carry out land reform. And you can imagine, well, who owned the land in Taiwan? It was the landed landed aristocracy, because, I mean, they're from this island. So then they felt kind of sidelined from power. And then because Taiwan entered a state of martial law in 1949, that meant the National Assembly, which was elected on the mainland back in 1947 or 48, I forgot, which was meant to represent all of China. Well, democracy was frozen. So you ended up with a National Assembly that was never reelected from 1949 until 1992. And of course, because they came from the mainland, there were a bunch of Baishengren elites. So then Beijing elites felt really sidelined. They were like, okay, you carried out land reform, screwed us over, and now we can't get into higher positions of power. We can only occupy lower levels of government. But if you wanted to relate to the people and rally the people behind you, that's not a winning message. You can't be like, oh, I used to oppress your peasant parents and grandparents, but now the KMT made it so I can't do that anymore. That's not a winning message. So how do you do it? Because of course the KMT did commit mistakes and whatever, and people in Taiwan, a lot of Beijing did feel that like the KMT it was a bunch of out of touch elites from the mainland that did not really care about the people of Taiwan. There was that sentiment. So then these Beijing elites really exploited it, and they were like, hey, these Baishengren, we're not from the same country. We're separate countries. We ought to be independent. We need to, if we want a better future, we got to take our country back. Our country is Taiwan. You see where I'm getting at, right? So it's really a political tool for the Beishengren to get back into power. And back then they were, of course, this was also presented as a liberal opposition movement. And there's some truth to that. The KMT martial law wasn't great. Now, there was like a Big Tent opposition movement, but in Big Tent opposition movements, at the end of the day, who gets power? It's the people with money and power, right? So once they ended martial law, okay, we got free elections, whatever. Okay, you get these elites, these Beijing elites into power, which did happen over time. And then, yeah, that's the situation we have today. And then, of course, the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, which was born from this opposition movement, they used to have like elements that were like pro-reunification or whatever, and then they just kind of got purged from the party. And because of liberal democracy, it's like, okay, how do we differentiate ourselves from the KMT? Because at this point, there's nothing really differentiating them. So it's just identity politics. The KMT is the party of out-of-touch elites from the mainland. We are the party of the common man in Taiwan, the Beishengren. So Taiwan separatism was kind of born out of this. And of course, because of international geopolitics, the US is like, hey, we don't support Taiwan separatism, but we also don't want reunification. So the easiest way to prevent reunification is to make it unpopular. So let's allow this separatist ideology to spread. But hey, Chen Shui-bian, hey, Tsai Ing-wen, hey, Lai Ching-de, you better not make moves without my permission. I get to tell you if you're to declare independence. So think of Taiwan separatists in relation to America as like, okay, America's Michael Vick, and Taiwan separatists are attack dogs. Now,
that's a very deep cut reference.
Now, Michael Vick likes it when his attack dogs listen to him and make him a lot of money. But then if his attack dogs ran away and started attacking kids and other dogs, he would have problems with it because, he would get into more trouble than he already got into. That's kind of the relationship.
It's basically like a neoliberal quagmire, which is like very common for most of U.S. imperialism.
That's exactly what it is. After all of that talking, that's exactly what it is.
Cool. Okay, so
it's not uncommon that you have movements co-opting and playing on real sentiments. I mean, the MAGA plays on the real sentiments of American white working class. for instance, or even the far right in Ireland, anti-migrant, are playing on anti-colonial lines, which is the history and identity of it's a clever move. It's a really clever move.
Yeah, it's a divide and
It is.
conquer, right?
Yeah.
Instead of allowing them to look at
Which is why even among all of these movements, you gotta connect with the average person and kind of understand that it's kind of like a false messiah. You realize things are wrong and you want an answer and you want to get out of the situation. So the answer isn't to, reject all of these people as individuals, but to point them to the truth, right? Because
Right.
like among MAGA, for example, there's a lot of people that they're not MAGA out of hatred, but it's just the Democrats failed them, previous politicians failed them, Trump appeared to them as this kind of false messiah, but a lot of them are realizing that he's unable or never really intended on delivering on his promises. That's just the way things are. It's kind of like, on the Chinese mainland during the revolution, a lot of peasants realized that the country was in bad shape. And some of them, among them were some that thought things are in bad shape because we no longer have an emperor. Right. But then, I mean, they were wrong. But then at the end of
very intelligent in saying that the symptom is the cause.
Yes,
and people think the symptom is the cause for a lack of education and for a lack of a revolutionary political education.
Right.
So, and that's why the America made sure they will extinguish everything Black Panther, because they were proposing an America with a revolutionary education. China also seems to be proposing this, right? And they probably are very ideological, afraid of that. I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think just to clarify a little bit further with Lai Ching-te, let's go back to that because
that guy Lai Ching-te.
Yeah, I think let's show him here cozying up to APAC, but also the other people that he's cozied up to is of course Japan, and that is really significant. But here he is. Look at him here. He's at the APAC dinner event. And what he says about Israel is quite, I mean, it's insane in this time. Like this is only, I think, a few months ago. So just to put that in context. And he did say, he said that Israel, US, and Taiwan share the same values. So just to give that, just to in this time, he's saying that. So that's who he is. But also he's cozying up to Japan as well. In November of last year, of course, Japan PM Taikaichi stated that Japan's self-defense forces could be mobilized if a Chinese attack on Taiwan threatened Japan's survival. This is the type of language that has been historically used by Japanese fascist imperialist forces, resulting in over 30 million Chinese people dead, and Taiwan colonized by Japan for 50 years. So, considering this situation with President Lai Ching-te, can you sort of explain how Taiwan is responding to these escalations from Japan, and also how the Taiwanese public is responding?
Well, when it comes to Lai Ching-te, most people have at this point, don't even want to listen to anything he says. When they see him on TV, they just switch channels. So it's like they don't even care anymore. It's like, okay, he wants to cozy up with like some Israeli dude or whatever and just suck up to America. They're just like, whatever, because he doesn't have the support of the people at all. And with what he's doing now is just, unfortunately, because of the way politics in Taiwan works, it's more like, if anybody acknowledges the fact that Lai Ching-te exists and is willing to appear on stage with him, it's spun as a win. So it's kind of pathetic in a sense, but also, I mean, he is right in the sense that I wouldn't say that the people of Taiwan, the US and Israel share the same values. I would say the average person in the US and in Taiwan definitely share many similar values, which is we just want a better future for our families and whatever. But with Israel, it's a little bit, don't want to get there. You know what I mean? But yeah. So what do people think? it's just, why are you sucking up to these foreign powers when you can't even take care of your own people? So what I'm saying is they're not really buying this as some sort of like PR win for Lai Ching-te or Taiwan. It's just like, I don't know. He's just a clown at this point. And what I'm trying to say is the people in Taiwan are increasingly disengaged from politics, because after having directly elected our leaders for the past 30 years, it's just empty promises after empty promises. And nowadays, Lai Ching-te, all he has left are supporters that defend all of his moves, while the rest of these people are numb to these things and are sick of feeling like hostages of politics. So I do welcome Lai Ching-te cozying up with Israel. I do welcome it, because it kind of shows the world, it shows everybody else what kind of a person he is, what kind of an opportunist he is. I welcome it. That doesn't mean I like it, but doesn't mean I like him or Israel. It just means I welcome this mask off moment.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think, though, that what I'm sort of noticing in the global north is the distancing from Trump, the distancing from Israel, as if U.S. imperialism is not, does not do those things. And it's funny because, like, Taiwan, like you're saying, Lai Ching-te, and also like Modi in India, like there's these people that are trying to cozy up to U.S. imperialism. They haven't actually gotten the memo yet that I think the world has actually changed in terms of the perception of Israel.
Which is why the current chairwoman of the KMT, and I want to remind the audience that the KMT today is not the same as the KMT of Chiang Kai-shek. It's right now, I feel like it's kind of an empty shell of what it once was, and it's a party without much of a message. And like the latest chair, Zheng Liwen, Zheng Liwen is interesting because she used to be DPP, but then she has since defected to the KMT and worked her way up into the party. And she said something that really resonated with many people on the island, which should serve as a barometer of how people's views are shifting. She said, previously, the U.S. was our benefactor, but the Chinese mainland will always be family. Why should we fight family? Is what she said. And think of this. This is the chairwoman of the biggest opposition party to the DPP.
Okay, so yeah,
this is the same party. Yes, and this is the same party that once fought a civil war with the Communist Party of China. The chairwoman is saying, hey, the Chinese mainland, it's always there. There will always be family. Now, is she in a position where she can move things forward in the right direction? Time will tell, but you can bet that should ties between Taiwan and the mainland become too close, the U.S. will do something about it. It's kind of like from 2008 to 2016, things were warming up, and it got to the point where the forces, I would say the forces of international finance.
Who does not want to have a family, a very, very rich mother? You embrace this family, you serve the best dinners, everything, when you have a super wealth and prosperous now member of the family. It's just such a blatant opportunistic thing to say, isn't it?
Yeah, but no, it's just so then, I mean, what I wanted to say was in 2014 you saw the Sunflower Movement, which was basically a color revolution against the Ma Ying-jeou government, because he was moving towards a free trade agreement with the Chinese mainland that would have further integrated the two economies between the two sides of the strait. So, I mean, of course, there were some concerns among the people about the lack of transparency of such a move. But like you say, in many color revolutions, they do take advantage of existing discontent and magnify it, and then they direct it in the direction that benefits them. And let's not forget 2014. Can we say it's a coincidence that the so-called umbrella color revolution in Hong Kong, as well as the Maidan revolution in Ukraine, all happened in the same year? And it was the year of Hillary Clinton's pivot to Asia, originally called Pivot to China. are we so naive to believe that it was all coincidence?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely connected. But this kind of brings me to this other thing that I'm thinking about is like, what about the sentiment towards understanding capitalism being really one of the main issues that we're having? Like, is there a shift in terms of Taiwan public in terms of that? Because, the communist China right next door showing the tangible results of socialism. What, are you seeing that?
I think if we're to be honest, right, if you look at the communist movements of the past and present, a lot of the way that it resonated with the people was not like this class stuff, which of course, I mean, that was spoken of in intellectual circles, but when in a society when the majority of the people are working people, that's kind of redundant. You got to translate it into something they care more about. It's like a better future for ourselves, blah 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 blah. I mean, there are voices in Taiwan saying the mainland can develop the way they do because in Taiwan land is privately owned. So then let's say you have this part of a city that's dilapidated and needing of a transformation. The government can't just step in and be like, hey, everybody, we have this new house for you. Please move. If you're not happy with these conditions, we can negotiate, but we want you out so then we can tear down these buildings and, rebuild this city center so it looks nicer and the infrastructure is upgraded. It's very difficult to do in Taiwan. But on the mainland, because land is not privately owned, you own the rights to use it for 70 years. You own the house on it, but you don't own the actual land itself. Then things become a little bit more flexible. And now there are voices saying, hey, that's the result of their system. Our system is, it's served us well for the past few decades when Taiwan managed to get rich under a very specific set of conditions. But that time has passed, and we should look at the mainland a little bit differently today, because the mainland today is also not the mainland of like 50 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and I also want to put a context of the majority of people in the mainland, when the government is like, hey, we're going to come in and rejuvenate your area, they're like, cha-ching, you know what I mean? Like they become millionaires overnight.
Yeah.
So a lot of people in mainland actually see that as like, oh my God, my dream has come true. It's not.
I know some people. They're like happy. They were like excitedly talking about like how their mom's houses was called to get, like, they call it Tai Chen, was like relocate and like knock down. He was like excited about it. He was like, yeah, after some negotiations, got a better house in a better area
and money for
Yeah.
their house. So I mean,
Yeah, goodbye old house.
it's not as scary as a lot of people in the West sort of portray
Yeah.
dynamic.
I mean, honestly, in the US, do you really own your land? Because if you don't pay your land taxes, they'll take
you
it
don't.
away.
And by the way, private corporations can do what you're saying. Like there's been multiple cases, like even just like anecdotally, because I don't have the statistics in front of me, but like where, for example, if your house is blocking like a Wendy's or something, like they will force you out, and they have different ways to force you out. So and even actually during Black Lives Matter, during like the first police brutal shootings. There was a woman that was shot. Brianna was her name. I can't remember her surname. And basically it came out that the corporations were trying to take over that area. And so they would have drug raids all the time on these tenants, really essentially to get them to move out. So there are different ways in which they can do it. Yeah.
They resort to thug tactics, to
exactly.
like mafia tactics.
Yeah. Okay, so last question, we have to talk to you about this. You started Taidong, sorry, tours, which is really exciting, and I'm dying to use Taidong tours because it describes itself as a new generation of DPRK, which is North Korea for people, travel. Can you talk to us about what prompted you to do this, and also share your insights into DPRK tourism, because as we know, it's not really opened up yet.
Right. I thank you for mentioning that, for plugging Taidong Tours, but also mentioning that it's not reopened. There's a lot of misconceptions about things. And so last year actually, I'm going to go back to 2020. When the pandemic started, before even Wuhan was like had its like city border shut down, the DPRK became the first country in the world to just completely like seal its borders in anticipation of like the pandemic becoming global. And I guess after that, after the pandemic ended, they still haven't reopened the country to tourism. And to me, that's just it's internal considerations. Maybe they're saying, hey, let's make use of this time to really upgrade our tourism facilities because some of the old things, Korean people are very prideful. So when they invite guests, they want to show them the best. So if a place is not up to, international standard, even if they don't say it, they feel embarrassed. That's their culture. And I know a lot of like Western travelers, they don't really get that because when they travel, they want to see how different people live and whatever. And then there's also some like poverty fetishists out there, but we won't get into that. So that's part of the reason why they haven't reopened. And others is probably, well, part of tourism is to show the rest of the world, hey, let's look at the DPRK beyond the headlines. We are a very friendly people, blah, 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 which is all true. But I think this is just my guess. Don't quote me on this. Because of their involvement in the special military operation between Russia and Ukraine, maybe their consideration is like, okay, we don't want to deal with Westerners coming in and just like we're trying to show goodwill and they're just gonna, be difficult about this and like,
So, it makes sense because right now there will be manufacturing consent against DPRK. I mean, again, manufacturing consent is not even needed at this point, but they will be trying to paint a bad picture about North Korea, like probably in an escalatory way.
Yeah. Right. So then last year, in March, or late February, actually, the special economic zone of Rason briefly reopened to tourism. And it was during that time when me and one of my friends who's been a tour leader to the DPRK for 3 years, but then like, the pandemic happened and he went back to Canada. He was like, hey, you know how you've always talked to me about starting our own company? Let's do it. So then I was like, okay. So then we registered a company and actually, no, we called the relevant authorities of the DPRK and then found a contact, like a contact like that works in China. And then we set up a meeting and he was like, oh yeah, I want to see company papers. So then I'm like, okay, give me a day or two. And then in Hong Kong, you can get company registration in like a day or two. That's why. So then we did that. I flew out to see the contact. It was basically kind of like a job interview. It was like he was sussing me out to make sure that, I'm somebody reliable to work with. And then after a few days, he said, hey, you guys got the contract. Which because like the way tourism works is they don't sell tours directly. They form partnerships with foreign tour companies like mine to bring in foreign tourists to their country on tours that they lead. And then like somebody from say Taedong Tours will go in and provide on the ground assistance to both the customers and the local Korean guides. So the reason why I started it was because I looked at the existing companies. One of them, Koryo Tours, started in 1993. And another company started in 2008. These are the main companies that cater to Westerners. And I thought, they're established. They have their own ways of doing things. If I were to work for them, I can't really change the direction of how they operate. But if I started my own thing, I can market things the way I want. I can try new things. And my goal really is to grow the pie because after 6 years of being shut down, there's a new generation of young adults who were still students when tourism was still possible, who probably didn't even know tourism was possible. And there's many more people who don't know travel to the DPRK was even a thing to begin with. So I'm like, nowadays with people getting all of their information from like TikTok and Instagram and through the algorithm, why wait for them to find us when we can get to them through, a good marketing strategy? So that was kind of like, we were like, okay, you know what? Some of these existing companies might not like our presence, but when we grow the pie, they will also benefit from it. And we really do just want to promote DPRK tourism and promote the DPRK North Korea as a world-class travel destination, which is, I believe, will be the case in in our lifetime. Especially, you look at the new facilities in Samjiyon and Wonsan Karma. It's really quite amazing. I can't wait to go back and see. Now, I was going to go back to the DPRK for the first time in years for the Pyongyang Marathon because Koryo Tours allowed me to gave me the privilege of leading one of their their marathon groups, but the DPRK, unfortunately, without much elaboration on their decision, just canceled the marathon. So that's not going to happen in April, but who knows? I might have some other opportunities to enter the country before the reopening of tourism. And when it does, when tourism reopens, I'll be ready to take you guys. You can find us on taedongtours.com and on Instagram at our Instagram handle is just Taedong Tours. That's TAEDONG Tours.
Okay, cool. Thank you. We're going to add more of the links down below, but thank you so much,
Thank you
Xiangyu.
so much.
I would love to go to North Korea. But how do
I
you
would
guys
like to take you. Sorry?
Go ahead. What did you say, Xiangyu?
You were about to say something. I was telling you to go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would love to go to North Korea, but I was just gonna introduce João Amorim here, and also João. This is Xiangyu. Yeah. So, do you have anything to add before we let Xiangyu go? We were just talking about North Korea and the possibility of tourism opening up in North Korea. Xiangyu has a tour, Taedong Tours, which will be bringing
Taedong.
Sorry. I can't even say Joe's name. Never mind.
That's very interesting. When it reopens, I definitely want to visit. I'm very curious to see. I know China has been making a lot of investments there, right? There's a lot of infrastructure that has been updated recently. What was the last time you were there, and how was it? What were your impressions?
Last time I was there was 2019.
Okay, so before the pandemic, yeah.
Yeah, before the pandemic. I have some friends who were.
They never reopened at all after the pandemic because
Okay. The reopening, there was tourism has never reopened for most people. It's reopened for Russians only, and then the special economic zone of Rason, which is in the northeast, Rason, it was briefly reopened for a few weeks in late February of last year until early March, and then it got shut down. And honestly, a huge part of why it was shut down was because of asshole influencers that talked a lot of shit. And then there was the Pyongyang Marathon last year, but the marathon was not tourism because if you sign up to join the Pyongyang Marathon, you go in on a sporting visa. You are officially an athlete, either a professional or a amateur athlete. Other than that, there's been no reopening of tourism. So unless you have a Russian passport, you cannot go to the DPRK at this time as a tourist. But if you are a businessman or whatever, you could possibly go in on a business visa. And that's how some Chinese people have been going. And there's news of the train service between China and the DPRK reopening on March 12th. That does not mean tourism has reopened. The train reopening and tourism reopening are two separate things. Believe it or not, there's a lot of personnel movement between the DPRK and China. A lot of workers and students, whatever, from the DPRK, like living in China, that need to go home, and also just a lot of like Chinese people, businessmen, like or whatever, traveling to the DPRK. And the train just provides another option besides flights because, well, one, it's cheaper, but two, let's say you are in Dandong, which is the border city between China and the DPRK, and you want to have a business meeting in Siniju, which is right across the river. Going by train is much faster than going to Shenyang, taking a flight to Pyongyang, and then taking the internal train to Siniju. So it just makes things a little bit easier. But we do see it nonetheless as a positive step towards the reopening. And what I can guarantee is every day that passes is one day closer to the eventual reopening of tourism.
Great. Looking forward to that day.
Yeah.
I would ask Xiangyu to rap for us before you leave.
It's not. You can find it on YouTube. I'm not good with acapella without a beat, but
His latest single, Home Invasion, that's your latest single, isn't it? Is really...
Oh, no, there's one after that. There's one
Oh,
after
okay,
that.
sorry. I missed the one after that. The
It's
Home
okay.
Invasion one that I listened to was really, really good. And it just like hits to the core of what's happening in Taiwan. So we should play it.
Before I go though, I want to say all three of you, when the DPRK reopens to tourism, you guys are all going at a discount.
Oh,
Friend price.
I would love to go. I'm going to hit you up on that and remind you that you also promised to send me your new album. The last time we talked.
Yes. When it comes out, I definitely will. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So 3 albums. So write down 3 albums with dedication, with autograph. Here.
Wow.
Okay, and also three trips to the DPRK for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Sara knows how to negotiate. Go, Sara. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Xiangyu. Really appreciate you joining us in Global South Rising.
Thank you for having me on once again.
Yeah, hopefully you'll come on again. Hopefully
I will. Hopefully it'll be easier to do the scheduling, but I'll be on the road a little bit more this year. You know, it's kind of weird. I'm like working in like travel now, but I actually hate traveling. I prefer to just stay at home.
That's funny. Well, you're stretching yourself outside of your comfort zone. I think that's always good for everyone's character.
Yeah. Definitely.
Good. So thank you, and see you next time.
Yeah, see you. Nice meeting you, Sara and João, and yeah, talk to you guys soon. Enjoy the rest of your conversation.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Xiangyu. All right. So how are you guys doing? Welcome, Zhao.
Good morning, good afternoon in London.
Yes.
Morning. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting to listen to Xiangyu. How do you pronounce his name? Xiangyu?
Yes, correct, Xiangyu. I assume.
Talk about North Korea, and I think somehow it ties up to my 10-minute watch this week, because it has to do with the status quo and the image the West or empire portrays of what's happening, right? So no one really knows. Like I wish I could have talked to Xiangyu more. How North Korea really is. I mean, what we know is what we hear from the media, right? And it's
completely wrong.
We don't even know how wrong it is, right? So it's very interesting. This week I brought 3 stories that talk a little bit about that, about the status quo, and about and I think they somehow relate to one another. And it goes from Hollywood to Havana back to Brasilia. And I'll start talking about what happened, how the Oscars that were just given out last week relate with diesel prices. So I think I would say my main thread is in these 3 stories that I'm bringing. There's one similar thing that happens. A powerful institution, either being the Academy or the U.S. Treasury or the U.S. government, makes a decision, and the Global South basically absorbs the consequences without having a vote. And that's how I think it somehow relates to the image that is portrayed from North Korea. So Hollywood decides, what stories are universal, and we pay sometimes with, they throw a bone. Like last year we had an Oscar, this year we didn't, But in general, the Global South is still somewhat invisible. Sometimes I think the Brazilian films that have been so good, both, I actually prefer The Secret Agent than last year, I'm Still Here, although it didn't win. But, there was no way a Brazilian film would win twice the Oscars. I knew it from the beginning. I was like, there was high hopes. People in Brazil were gathering together like it was the World Cup to see it. There was people cheering in different moments of the Oscars or booing in the streets. I live in a particular street here in Copacabana where people gather for soccer matches, right? And they had gathered for the Oscars. Why it didn't come. But, basically my point is, Hollywood decides if the story is universal or not. We pay the price. Washington decides to sanction Cuba. It's the Cuban people who pay with medicine shortages. Washington decides together with Israel to bomb Iran. We're here in the global South paying the price of 14,000 kilometers away of this war that has somewhat, not very much to do with what we're doing here. So what it comes down to is that powerful states, especially the empire, now act simply because they have the power to act. There's no justification needed anymore. In the past, it was, okay, we have to topple this evil regime or whatever. Now it's just like, whatever, we're going to do it, So there's no pretense of rules even, So I think in my watch, I want to look at this practice and look how the global South decides to act anyway. So I'm going to start with the Oscars. Is that okay? So last week in the Academy...
provocation for you.
Yeah.
What the F we need Hollywood validation to say our national movement cinema has a story to tell. And this is story for us, is mainly for us Brazilian who lack memory of a dark time, who does not discuss sufficiently in school dark time. What the fuck we need this idiots, this idiocracy from Oscars, which is a commercial show. And by the way, so tacky. Look at the background, look at the speeches. Do we really need them?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I'm thinking in many ways, I think I'm going to touch on it, but just to respond it in a few sentences, I feel, particularly as Brazilians, but generally, I think as Latin Americans, we are a Western culture. We're Latin, but we're a Western culture still. We're culturally dominated by the U.S. point of view and the U.S. lifestyle. We mimic it today. And although we might have had in this past 25 years, even more in the past 50 years, a lot of movements that tried to separate us from, Washington's influence, we haven't managed yet, right? So I think we are still very gullible towards the acceptance and the validation of the U.S., right? So, as I said, people gathered around. And look, the people who are watching the Oscars, who care if the secret agents won or not, are not right-wing people, right? They're not the ones that are going to Miami for Disney, to vacation. It's already the most progressive ones. So it shows you how deep this influence is. It has a big influence on the most critical thinkers of our country. And that validation is still, people might say it, criticize it, even myself, if my film gets nominated next year, I'll be there, right, doing this piece.
We'll come along, Ileana, we'll come along with Palestine t-shirts.
Yeah, well, talking about Palestine, I'm going to dive into my first story, which talks about that. Last week, during the Academy Awards, nominated five films for Best International Feature, right? And one of them was The Voice of Hind Rajab. I don't know if you guys heard about that film, but it's a film that talks about the 6-year-old Palestinian girl killed by Israeli forces and while waiting for an ambulance, right? So her voice was recorded on that call and became a symbol of the ongoing genocide. What is really, empire-ish about this story is the Academy watched it, the Academy nominated the film, in the end, Norway won, right? But there's one detail that didn't make most of the headline. Motaz Malez, the film's lead Palestinian actor, was barred from entering the United States by Trump's travel ban on Palestinians. So any Palestinian authority that has there's a passport holder can't go in the States. He couldn't attend the ceremony for his own nominated film, you know. And he wrote from Gaza, you can block a passport, you cannot block a voice, you know. So that shows the dichotomy of the empire and the impression that it wants to give, and maybe the soft power, yes, we care, of Hollywood, with the reality of what's really happening. You know, not to say that a lot of actors are not against the war. Of course they are. And then bring it to Brazil, you know, Brazil's secret agent with Wagner Moura, who's an amazing actor, the first male actor nominated for this lead category. It was historic. And he lost to Michael B. Jordan, who was in a vampire film, right? So, I mean, kids love vampire films. That's okay, but you know, it tells a lot about Hollywood. And then Javier Bardem, you know, walked onto the stage to present this category, you know, Best International Feature, looked into the cameras and said, "No to war, free Palestine." You know, he was wearing a Palestinian pin, "No a la guerra," on his lapel. The crowd applauded, and then the Academy moved on. You know, so I think this is quite interesting. And then that takes me to my second point, which is, you know, while Hollywood was sorting the nominees, you know, Cuba was running out of medicine, right? So not some medicine, but, you know, 70% of Cuba's basic medicine list is currently unavailable, meaning children, elderly people, you know, patients with chronic illnesses, they're having their lives put at risk, you know, basic stuff, painkillers, insulin, you know, none of that is being provided, you know. And I think especially now, but decades of US sanctions created a financial choke point so tight that even the Brazilian government, you know, admits it can barely help, you know. There's an article I shared with you guys this week where my father says, Celso Amorim, advisor to the president, he says, Brazil has few concrete instruments to help because virtually any transaction ends up going through mechanisms subject to US jurisdiction. So that's the Brazilian government's official saying on this. What did the MST do? The MST is the movement of workers without land in Brazil, or the Brazilian landless workers movement. They went directly to a Brazilian pharmaceutical manufacturer. You know, I want to point them out. Europharma bought medicine at wholesale price at the laboratory's minimum purchase lot, took the list of medicines from Cuba's Ministry of Health, you know, and packed almost 2 tons of priority medications and routed it through Instituto Cultivar directly to Santiago, Cuba. So the first delivery was worth about $500,000 worth of medicine that is already on the ground now in Cuba. And the second ship.
Sometimes, and Ileana, I wonder when we are going to launch a claim against the US because this is genocidal. If people don't have access to food, you can't operate people, and you make them starve and have no access of medication, and you have Trump saying it's going to be an honor to take Cuba. I'm sorry, I think we need a claim here against the US for the genocidal behavior in Cuba. I was talking to a lawyer who went to Cuba. Her tourist guide has a master's degree in engineering. He hadn't eaten for 4 days, hadn't eaten anything for 4 days. If you have a cough in Cuba, you will have a condition because you won't be able to access any medication. I think it's about time for the international community to launch a claim against this genocidal behavior against Cuba. Cuba is a symbol of internationalism, of revolutionary resistance. We need to do something about Cuba. Don't you think so, João?
I think so. And I think that's exactly what the MST did themselves. And they were able to do it without, the authorization of Washington or even of the Brazilian government. They bypassed, the IMF, no SWIFT, no Washington approval, and sent, 2 tons of medicine to Cuba. That's a very brave act. And that's the Global South acting. I think one of the after you guys brought the positive ending last time, I thought I need to be this guy who brings a little bit of a positive thing to the show, because I believe in that we need, as I said in the past, I'm a short-term pessimist, but I'm a long-term optimist. I have teenage kids, so I'm always trying to look for solutions. And I think MST was very brave. Was very brave to do so. It's unfortunate that the machine the U.S. put in place around sanctions, around bank transfers, it really chokes even the possibility of countries themselves helping Cuba. So it's it's a particularly delicate situation. And one that, as you said, Trump has expressed very clearly that he's about to take over. I think they've been wanting to do that for a long time. There have been some up and downs. Obama kind of, had a moment there where it seemed like he was going to change things. But, we're back in a situation, I think, as bad as what we had 40, 50 years ago during the missile crisis, right? And I was in Cuba. Look, I was in Cuba 2 years ago for the Havana Film Festival. I had a film that showed there, Tropical Utopia, the film I did with Chomsky and Amorim, and I had never been. And it's unfortunate that I only went then, but I was still marveled by it. Although there was, a lot of issues as far as, the collection of trash. A lot of times it was, there was a lot there, and you could see, that there was a lot of products that were not available and so forth. But if there's one thing, and I don't know if you guys been to Cuba, but there's one thing that really touched me, was a general feel that I had with all the Cubans, is that wherever I've been in the planet, and I've lived in many countries because I'm a diplomat's child, and had an international film career, I always felt wherever I went that people were comparing themselves to me, and I was comparing myself to them. There's like a very, and I didn't feel that in Cuba. I think people were, and not only didn't I feel that, like there's a constant competition. I lived in New York for many years, Ileana as well, and it's like the correct answer in New York when people ask you, how are you? You say busy, right? Busy. So that says a lot about that culture. In Cuba, I could talk to everyone on the street. The guy driving the Coco taxi, he was a nephew of Santiago Alvarez, a filmmaker. I mean, we were talking about, international politics. I could never in an Uber in Brazil, I could never. So I think there's clearly, they managed to give a basic education to people that is amongst the best in the world. And I think one that provides the most critical thought. That's my take, and I was amazed by it because, that from the guy working in the lobby of the hotel to the people I met at the beach or at the film festival or the Coco taxi driver that was there. So I think it's terrible. I don't know what we can do. I think that needs to be there. I think the BRICS really need to act as a strong voice. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening. And I don't see that happening for many reasons. I mean, internally in Brazil, we have an election year where the right is very strong and Lula has a chance of really losing. So he's very cautious about having too strong of an alignment with China and Russia because of the middle class electorate. And that makes it very hard, because in many ways, the architects of the BRICS, it's the 5 countries, but it was a Brazilian initiative. And if we're not having that strong voice and say, no, let's do it, because I think China is ready to do it. India is ready to do it. And I think Russia definitely is ready to do it. So I think a lot has to do with our moments in Brazil. And that takes me to my last point on a positive note. 2 days ago, today's March 20th. Yeah, on March 18th, President Lula gave a speech honoring the women of the aquaculture sector, mainly fishing and aquaculture sector. And he brought up an issue. He said that in his speech, we here who have nothing to do with this war, who are 14,000 kilometers away from Iran, far from Lebanon, far from Israel, why do we have to pay the price of fuel? So since US and Israel started this war on February 28th, the oil prices already went up from $60 to $70 a barrel to up to 120. It was at 100, but people say it's going to go back up to 200 maybe, And, this relates to what I brought up last week. When we have diesel prices rising across the global south, this is hitting directly farmers, truck drivers, fishermen, people who had absolutely no vote in this war, right? They decided they own the world, they can attack whatever they want. And the victims, once again, will be the workers, of the world, especially of the global south. So I think, these 3 stories, they have something in common. It has to do with what our interviewee had to say as well about the status quo. Empire decides on something and the global south pays the price. But I think the solutions, they're being architectured right now. What did the Brazilian government do to respond? As far for the, I don't think it's a solution, but it helps. It's 0 taxes on diesel. It gave emergency subsidies to producers and importers of fertilizers. There is a plan of the National Bank of Development of producing local fertilizers, less dependent on oil-based fertilizers. And then finally, I think we need to think of the de-dollarization of the economy, South-South trade, energy sovereignty, not to be dependent. And I think in many ways, I'm an environmentalist. So I'm very obviously critical to, the oil industry and all of that. So why don't we take this opportunity to really push forward in the energy transition? Oil prices are going to go up. This is an opportunity to take this situation that is now unavoidable and turn it around. Brazil, for instance, produces ethanol cars. They're cars that are moved on ethanol that is made from sugarcane. China has this huge, amazing technology of electric vehicles. BYD now has a factory in Bahia, and they're going to build the first ethanol electric hybrid vehicle. So this is the type of partnership that is going to tumble the empire. And until we're shy and we're cautious about, is Trump going to bomb us? And this, we're being manipulated. We're being controlled by them, right? And it's only when we actually have the strength together as Global South, as BRICS, to really, make our voices heard that we're going to make the change. And that applies, to the Oscars, not be so culturally dependent on them and valuing that so much. That has to do with what's going on in Cuba, and the attitude the MST had, the movement of the workers without land. There are other movements like that in the world. Why aren't they helping Cuba? There's other people that are aligned with the Cuban ideals. Why aren't we, doing something about it? I think that's maybe something, maybe we should, think about, the three of us, who do we know? What can we do? Who can we contact to make, to avoid the worst there? And finally, this, the situation of war and the dependency on oil and gas and fossil fuel in general. How can we take this crisis and turn it into an opportunity to create a green economy, a more multipolar world that is not always waiting for Washington's approval?
And on that note, I would say we have a link here for people watching us who want to contribute with Cuba. So the Cuba International Solidarity Campaign from London is collecting funds to revert. They're going to go into a trip with medicines in the act of a Solidarity International, like MST. MST is the movement of landless movement in Brazil, a revolutionary movement for agrar reform. They carry the fight for agrar reform in their bloods. These are family that go into land, camp for years and years in very horrible conditions in land to push government to fulfill its constitutional duty to divide the land. It's a beautiful, beautiful movement. It's a movement that was born of the liberation theology, Marxist priests who got in solidarity with working class. Actually, not even working class, João. These are people enslaved, right? It's enslaved people, setting them free from a very horrific colonial past. So MST is in so many levels the profound waters that causes change in Brazil. And we have here a link. Ileana, do you think you can put the link for people to contribute to Cuba? I am contributing, and I hope everyone will as well. Thank you, João, for bringing Cuba into the game.
The link is in the chat, and it's also in the description for anyone who wants to see it.
Amazing, Ileana, yeah.
And next week, we do have a guest on Global South Rising that will talk about Cuba. He's filmmaker Eduardo Flores Torres. His documentary film was called Fidel Up Close. It was a really interesting film. I have an interview with him on Global Majority for Peace, so check that out. But he will be with us next week because he just came back from Cuba. He's currently based in Mexico. So
I might have to be early on for that one, I guess. I'll have to make an exception.
You should.
I'll come in at 1 hour earlier then to be able to do this talk. That's very.
We're currently trying to figure out schedule, so I'll talk to you about that off air. But yes, so I'm excited about that. João, that was a really, really interesting watch. So many different things to talk about with that. I think I'm going to hone in on the propaganda thing because there's one thing that you said that really struck me where you said that when you visited Cuba, you talked to, I think, a driver about politics on this deep level that you may not experience in Brazil. And I just keep remembering someone who said that basically a socialist country or an anti-imperialist country, essentially a country outside of imperialist control, needs their population to be more educated. Conversely, I think countries in the global core, in the imperial core, we need our populations to be undereducated. We need them to be ignorant and dependent on propaganda. So that's like a really important point, I think, in terms of looking at the Oscars. The ironic thing I think that we're facing is, like you said, you sort of elucidated that manufacturing of consent is no longer actually needed if it ever was. There was sort of a veneer that it was needed. It probably never really was needed, but now we're seeing that they don't need it at all. They unilaterally are going in and committing genocides, etc., without public approval. But while they do that, the necessity of these propagandic soft power institutes like the Oscars, ironically, their influence is no longer as important. It's kind of like what Sara was saying. We need, first of all, not to be dependent on the cultural approval of the West, So I think that's a really interesting an interesting point that you're making with your watch. And then the other thing, and this is more of a question finally, is more that what I'm observing, say, like, for example, South Korea, which, as we know, South Korea is a de facto US military colony. So essentially, its rise in Korean soap opera, dramas, entertainment, the K-pop soft power is essentially almost like a extension of like a capitalist soft power. It's not in any way revolutionary, but the way that they did it, we can kind of see like China is doing this as well, like where they really invested in their local entertainment economy. They made sure that there was a quota of Korean films and cinemas, etc. In China, obviously, it's even more like in maybe the past 5-10 years, they really invested in internal entertainment, cultural entertainment. Jackie Chan, that used to be, Jackie Chan, he used to be part of the PCC, the consultative body of the Chinese political system. And I remember this quote from him where he was like, Kung Fu Panda. Kung Fu's Chinese, Panda is Chinese, but Kung Fu Panda is American. And we should have our own Kung Fu Panda. And then now we've had Neza, which is like the biggest animation movie ever. And that is completely Chinese. So my question is this, like, even though Brazil is a Western cultured country, like you were saying, it really doesn't need to be, right? It like, if you start investing now in that, like 10 years, 5 years from now, you're looking at a completely different cultural landscape, aren't you? Like, so where's the push for that in Brazil?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very glad you brought that up. And in fact, maybe next week that will be my watch, because I think this is a very current issue in Brazil. It's one that touches on my work directly and on the work of the film industry and of our sovereign way of thinking very strongly. And unfortunately, in my opinion, it's not going well at all in Brazil. Right now, as is, we have in Congress a bill to regulate VOD, and also as the VOD are the streamings, basically, right? Video on demand platforms such as Netflix, Amazon, but also SVOD that would include the social networks. These networks basic and platforms are basically unregulated and do not pay taxes or contribute to the Brazilian audiovisual industry. So, for instance, the quotas are inexistent or very small. Differently than, for instance, we have a law that was passed in Lula's first or second mandate, where international channels, and this is back 20 years ago, they have an obligation of a certain amount of a quota of Brazilian products they have to have in their Brazilian shows they have to have in their and China has that, Russia has that, in China it's up to 90%. That's why their industry developed. And as you brought up, and this is one thing that I always bring up when I talk about film and I give speeches, is South Korea as a model, not of its content, because you're absolutely right. It's basically an extension of the US mumbo jumbo to alienate people and keep them like stupid. Sorry. Korean's gonna hate me, but obviously there's good stuff and there's amazing, talented Korean films. But in general, it's a soft power targeted towards the stuff that you just watch and don't think. It's not going to develop a critical thought or any of that, with a few exceptions. But they did incentivate and made a political or a strategic priority to develop their film industry, and we're not capable of doing that in Brazil, because everything in Brazil has to go through Congress. We have an extreme right-wing Congress right now, and last year the bill was in the House of Representatives. Now it's in Senate to regulate VOD, AI, and the social networks. And what was passed in the House of Representatives is terrible. It's like 2% quota. It's just something that's so minimal. Only 2% of their taxes is going to go towards paying Brazilian content. And they're trying to make it worse in the Senate now. And there's a huge lobby of this streaming platforms and of all the social networks in Congress to make sure that whatever passes is, good for them. In fact, they're trying to disfigure the idea and use public funds to produce IP they will own. So yeah, it's terrible. And in many ways, I feel the federal government, although it does not agree with that, it doesn't have the power to make a difference. So we're working towards, and I've been very much involved with this, calling deputies and talking the Ministry of Culture and so forth. I've been very, very involved in this, and it's dramatic. At the point that we're agreeing to pass something that gives us a little bit of space, not to end up with nothing. So that's the situation. However, again, trying to bring a good news to the table. Just yesterday, and I can only bring this up because you brought this point up, so I thank you, Ileana. Just yesterday, a bill was passed in the House of Representatives of Brazil of co-production with China, film co-production with China. Believe it or not, yeah. So this is a big victory. It has to go to Senate and then sanctioned by the president, but it's an amazing victory and one that will possibly provide funds for this co-productions. You guys know I'm involved in a co-production with China that involves a panda. It's a Xiangyu. It's a panda from China that comes to Brazil and meets a golden lion, tamarin, and a capybara and travel around our country. So I'm very much involved in this world and very much with a Chinese panda and Brazilian characters, right? So I'm trying to work this basis with kids, right? To create this non-aligned media. It's what Celso, my father, calls the active non-alignment. I think we have to be actively non-aligned, not follow rules from anywhere and think about our country's sovereignty and what is important for the global south, and for our countries specifically. So I think adopting that idea of the active non-alignment in film is key, but for that, people need to develop critical thought. And while people are watching the Korean, how do you call those, the dramas, and, or just doom scrolling, they're not developing critical thought, and that's something that we need to do. And hopefully this co-production production agreement with China will open a lot of doors for us to partnership on more non-alignment content.
That actually will, I'm also talking a little bit about that in my watch, so I'm excited to sort of thread that needle, but congratulations on that. That's a huge win.
I know. That was amazing. Yeah.
Go ahead, Sara.
Oh, should I go for my watch?
Yeah, unless you have anything else to add to this.
No, I think it's João, I'm going to do something so polemic here. Just for a change, I'm actively non-aligning. I did not like The Secret Agent. Can you believe this? But I do recognize
it for us. I have not watched it.
Yeah, I totally recognize its importance. But of course, I'm not in this perspective of, I'm not a professional, but I did not like it, which is okay. But I do recognize.
Can you say why you didn't like it without spoiling it?
I think it's the language is very American in a way. It attempts on a Brazilian language by referencing to Brazilian culture elements, by portraying a Brazil that not many people know. It doesn't show the beats. It's try to break a stereotype. I think in the stereotypical language, I think we have had a better. If you travel through Brazil, I think we are different from that. I think Netflix create a standard for the language. I feel there was a how can I say? I thought it was a bit pretentious, and I thought also that I didn't feel it was super Brazilian for me, like the Brazilians that I know of the MST, the Brazil that I know from indigenous people. I think our cultural richness is not totally, it's not really there. That's the feeling I had. There was a feeling, a movie that it's good to sell abroad. I want more productions that talks about our soul, our hidden soul, because Brazil has an immense culture. And I've been to many countries, but I think Brazil is extremely complex mixture of culture. And I get myself surprised every time I go to a different place. I wish we had a film industry that will go deeper in that and that may trouble people abroad for not understanding it, because we have this here. We have an incredible cultural diversity, which is for us Brazilian difficult to touch, and I think we have to start to unveiling this this depth of our culture. So I felt like I could watch this in Netflix, like referencing other greater masterpiece. I think this is a very dangerous move in a cinematographic production to make self-references or to make references to other movies. I only seen like 2 directors doing this really well, which is Almodovar, like self-referenced and reference to other movies, or Stanley Kubrick. I thought it was pretentious, but I was very happy this movie went in International Tribune because it helps distributing it. And right now in Brazil is a political statement of a memory that is lacking, a memory that is not discussing. But that was my very, very polemic, and I think nobody agrees with me on that.
I'm gonna have to comment on that. I'm sorry, even if you could even because if some people are watching, I want to make sure they know I don't agree.
Good. Okay, go ahead.
I have to watch it and be the tiebreaker.
You have to watch it. And I thought it was boring too, João. I was just waiting for it to finish. Right. Oh, come on.
I have to say I disagree completely, and I respect your opinion. I do think that there's one thing that you said that I agree, is that it uses a language that is universal. In many ways, it made me think of Quentin Tarantino's films, like Pulp Fiction. The fact that the structure is not linear and the way it was shot, the type of cinematography, I think it's very international, and I think it does something really well, which is exactly the stuff you didn't like. It's because it uses a language that is the world is ready to assimilate, and Netflix, already has it on its catalog, as you put it well. This is a film that has the potential of reaching people that won't watch, the handcrafted Brazilian cultural film a la Glauber Rocha, or that I love as well, but that has this type of what you're calling a Brazilian quality. I think film language is universal. As a filmmaker myself, I have to adapt the language I'm using to who the final client is, right? So now I'm doing this animation with China. There's many things that we need to do different. In fact, we have to have everything approved by the NRTA in China, which is a regulation entity like Ancine. So, we have to adapt to who are we targeting to? I always, when people ask me, like, how do you go about, creating a film? First of all, you need to know what story you want to tell. And then you need to know who do you want to tell this story to? And then finally, the last question is, how are you going to tell the story to these people? So I think he managed, and I'm going to try to be short because you both have your watches still. But I think he managed to create something that is a universal language to talk about, this time that we lived in Brazil. It's the second film that runs around the time of the dictatorship. And this one is not a true story, right? The exact true story. It's really a fiction. But he managed to create a language that is universal, that got him to the Oscars, you know, that was applauded in Cannes by people standing, you know, for minutes. That wasn't, you know, so you know, not, I think there's a lot there. And I think Kleber Mendonça, in my opinion, the director, is currently the best director in Brazil. You know, and I think he's able to make an...
Walter Salles.
Walter Salles comes straight from, you know, I like him too. I actually saw him 2 days ago. But, you know, I think the film was great. But Walter Salles, he's from you know, from a banking family. He can afford to spend 7 years making a film, you know. He doesn't live of filmmaking. Kleber, you know, I don't think he's like poor, but he came from the ground up, right? He has to make films for a living, you know. Maybe now he's getting to a point where, but nowhere close to Walter Salles, where, you know, he's from the Itaú family, you know, and he has, you know, he's, you know, hopefully he's not listening to this, but, you know, he comes from a background that allows him to, you know, to spend 7 years working on a film. Who can afford that in Brazil? You know, so it's not a reality. You know, it's really unfair competition. And I think it's very important you bring that up, because it has to do with what you know, Ileana said and what I just said. These two films do not represent the state of the Brazilian film industry right now. There are exceptions. They were not even funded by this government, and they do not in Brazil. We're living a good moment. We're not.
No,
we're not.
Right.
You know. So it's very important that we say that. I think that's the most important message. We're not, these two films, although they're amazing, do not represent the reality of, you know, the state of the film industry in Brazil right now, which is falling apart.
You're right. And there's a lot of quilombolas filmmaking, where there's Maroons filmmaking. There's a lot of indigenous filmmaking. I really would like to hear their voices. They have a very different way to tell a story. It's mind-boggling, but it's just so deep. Yeah, you're right, João. Where are those voices? They are there. They are definitely there. We have a much varied cultural production that doesn't get to be seen at all.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I am very eager to hear more about João's in the future, maybe future watches where you talk more deeply about filmmaking and stuff like that, because that is a really important point. And maybe at some point you could show us some footage about the Brazilian panda, because I really love panda.
Yeah, we'd love to see that. Yeah.
But now we have Sara's watch, which is, maybe it's a hopeful thing. It's very interesting. And anyway, take it away, Sara.
Yeah, so I actually, I'm going to talk about new legal claims that there may be too little, there may be too late, and I don't want to put the ICJ as a justice, as a court of justice, but it just shows some shifts that comes, I think, from the ground and reflect at some level at legal institutions. Those are fights. Those are really long-standing fights that seem to be deterring some countries. We saw Germany retreating its intervention in the case South Africa against Israel for genocide. Of course, Germany will never do this for the right reasons, but we saw now March 26, 2026, like yesterday, Germany announced it will not file a third-party intervention defending Israel, in this case brought by South Africa, before the International Court of Justice, ICJ, accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. So Germany, last year, Merz, which is, I think, a Nazi, a new Hitler-like leader in Germany, he said that the accusation, South Africa accusation, were baseless, was the political instrumentalization of the Genocide Convention of 48. So he argued that Israel had the right to self-defense by creating a genocidal policy, white supremacist policy, because of the October 7th attack. So this is a narrative that I think felt even in the MAGA spectrum MAGA doesn't want anymore Israel being great again, and Israel calling any shots, and Mossad being in the forefront of their policies. So that year, Germany government had authorized military equipment exports more than 10 times higher in the previous year. So Germany was not only supporting Israel against South Africa in the ICJ case, but they increased 10 times from the previous years the equipment export. And let's not forget, Germany is the country in Europe that helps Israel the most, even more than the UK. So, so Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who's also an idiot, he declared that Israel was Staatsräson, which is German state reason because of the Holocaust. We know the industry of Holocaust by Finkelstein. So this decision of yesterday reverts this commitment. This is quite telling. And we saw this spokesperson, Otto Hinterseher, he was explaining during the Bundestag hearing that he was saying, well, this is due to new developments. And it's very interesting because he stated, we stand with Israel. We still believe this is a baseless and political instrumentalization. We are just withdrawing the third-party intervention because of a Nicaragua case. And that's my point. Nicaragua, in March 2024, initiated proceedings at the ICJ accusing Germany of violating international law by financing Israel and suspending its contributions to the UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. And what Nicaragua argues is that by sending military equipment and suspending funds to UNRWA, which provides essential support for the civilian population, Germany would be facilitating the commission of genocide. This is a very, very elegant legal strategy of Nicaragua and a very dangerous logic for Israel allies, not only Israel, but Israel allies, because this case established something new, established a potential broad precedent. Just as South Africa's case sent a signal that Israel genocide could be scrutinized, Nicaragua is saying whoever joins is accomplice and we will scrutinize you. And what is Israel without the help of the US? What is Israel without the help of Germany? What is Israel without the help of Italy, France, Great Britain, and even Ireland? So I think this is a very an important turn of events. We see Nicaragua pressing Germany towards moving back, because Germany tried for this Nicaragua case to be archived, and the ICJ say, no, we're not going to archive it. And let me tell you, Germany, what are the numbers underpinning the case? So Germany has exported arms worth of 325 million to Israel just in 2023, together with the United States. So they were responsible for 99 arms export to Israel in recent years. So how come you cannot say you are part of a genocide? So, and one of Nicaragua's lawyers told the tribunal, this is a pathetic excuse to provide humanitarian aid through airdrops where people even got hit by those airdrops. I have the chance to see what they were airdropping by my Palestinian friend who has friends in South Gaza City. It's disgusting. It's just one package of strange commercialized food for an entire family who was starving for more than 1 year. So these are their help, you know, just enough to keep them alive for another few hours, to bomb them in their heads. I think this humanitarian, it's close to torture. So the ICJ ruled against imposing an emergent provision. We saw this measure, but refused to dismiss the case as Germany had requested. And I think this case exactly made unattainable for Germany to carry on to appear simultaneously helping Israel, because it would just reinforce the Nicaragua case. How come, you know, is this? I think this is an interesting turn of events. And I think this makes Germany's position very, very unattainable too, because, you know, the Genocide Convention, we all know, it was built in direct response to the Holocaust. Yeah, and rightly so. Germany was the perpetrator. Germany is a founding signatory of that convention exactly because of the Holocaust they did. And now it's being persecuted under the same reason, and it chooses to invoke to justify arming those who is committing a genocide. So this never again for Germans, it's not never again for everyone, so it isn't a never again. Germany has its third genocide on their backs. So I think this is amazing. I'll just show a video of those idiots talking here at the Bundestag. I won't bother you too much with listening to them, but it's absolutely disgusting. Let me see if I can find it here. The level of, I can't find it right now, but the level of, let's say, oh, here, the cynicism of them. Look at them. Look at them. I'll translate a little bit.
Thema ist die Klage gegen Israel, das Genozidverfahren vor dem IGH. Deutschland hatte angekündigt, mit einer juristischen Stellungnahme Israel an die Seite zu treten, zu unterstützen.
He's saying, well, we're talking about here about the legal case against Israel and Germany is talked about being third-party intervention in defense of Israel.
Der Fachbegriff ist, glaube ich, Nebenintervention. Die Frist für die Abgabe einer solchen Nebenintervention läuft in etwa 2 Wochen ab.
And they're saying we have a deadline to deliver this intervention in 2 weeks' time.
Wird es eine solche Nebenintervention inhaltlich qualifiziert geben oder lassen Sie die Frist verstreichen?
So they ask in Parliament, are you going to intervene or are you just going to let the deadline be expired?
Nein, eine solche wird es nicht geben.
No, we're not going to have an intervention.
Das heißt, das, was die deutsche Bundesregierung vor 2 Jahren angekündigt hat, dass es eine Nebenintervention geben werde, weil man die Vorwürfe für absurd hält, das wird nicht weiter verfolgt.
So what you're saying is that Germany, he's kind of indicating, you said that the claims against Israel was absurd. So is Germany withdrawing for this position from this material statement? That's what he's trying to get out of Hinterseher.
Die damalige Stellungnahme gilt nicht mehr oder was ist der Grund dafür, dass es keine Nebenintervention gibt?
We want to know the reason why you're not going to intervene is because you change your mind.
Ja, ich glaube, Sie heben jetzt auf eine Aussage ab, die die Vorgängerregierung im Januar 2024 getroffen hatte. Unmittelbar eben auf diese Klageeinreichung Südafrikas damals im Dezember 2023. Sie wissen auch, dass es seitdem neue Entwicklungen gab, unter anderem die Entwicklung, dass Nicaragua kurz darauf auch im Frühjahr 2024 eine Klage eingereicht hat vor dem IGH gegen Deutschland. Wir sind jetzt eben selbst Teil eines streitigen Verfahrens vor dem IGH und haben uns infolgedessen entschieden, von dieser Möglichkeit eben nicht Gebrauch zu machen und stattdessen auf dieses Verfahren, in dem wir eben selbst Teil sind, zu konzentrieren.
So it's ridiculous. He's saying, well, we decided for sort of strategic reasons because of the Nicaragua case. Basically, he's saying without saying we haven't changed our minds, but then he get pressed again and let's see what he spells out.
Herr Jung, Moment.
Die Vorgängerregierung sprach ja hier davon, dass der Genozidvorwurf jeder Grundlage entbehre. Ist das auch nicht mehr Haltung dieser Bundesregierung?
Das habe ich nicht gesagt. Ich habe gesagt, wir konzentrieren uns auf ein Verfahren vor dem IGH.
And then a journalist asked, so are you saying that you no longer think that the accusations of genocide is absurd? No, I haven't said that. I'm just saying that for strategic reasons, we are withdrawing. So this is Germany doubling down on their genocidal support rhetorically, politically, diplomatic, and militarily for Israel. I think it's absolutely shocking, but Nicaragua, a global South country, did a twist and made German withdraw, which is great, which is in a way is great because it shows some level of political fragility. You know, I don't think, I think Germany would get away with both cases 2 years ago, 2 years ago. I don't think it will get away anymore. And the ICJ is a highly political court. So that goes to show that Germany is really losing political ground with its support to Israel. So it's well done, Nicaragua. I'm very proud of it. And another development, which I think is very important, is that on March 17, now the Brussels Criminal Court decided to open a criminal trial against the former Belgian diplomat Etienne d'Avignon, whatever how you call this, and in his role of the abduction and transfer that led to assassination of the revolutionary Congo leader, Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. So this is, I think this is a decision of great significance because the court went further than the federal public prosecution had requested. So they extended the scope of the trial to cover the murders of Maurice Mpolo and Joseph Okito, who were also both executed with Lumumba in 1961. Yeah, so this Etienne d'Avignon, he is one of the 12 Belgian diplomats who survived. He's now 93. And in a way, it's too little too late. But in the other way, I think is, in a way, historical justice. There's Lumumba's family have been, since 2000, after decades of silence, trying to get a parliamentary inquiry commission this commission concluded that the Belgian government had an undeniable moral responsibility, what happened to Lumumba. So we are turning here a moral responsibility into a legal one. And I think this is pretty significant. And I think those small gestures awake the anti-colonial fights and sentiment and consciousness around the world. And we know that I think Lumumba's family launched a criminal complaint 15 years ago in 2011, and that culminated into this trial now. So it is a victory. Who was Lumumba? Lumumba was born in 1925 in the Belgian Congo. He was the first prime minister of an independent Congo. He was a Pan-Africanist leader of his generation. I think Lumumba has inspired a lot of people around the world. He was self-taught. He was a former colonial postal worker. He became the principal organizer of the Mouvement National Angolais, the national Congolese movement. And he was the most radical voice of Congolese independence at all levels. And Lumumba, when he delivers historical speech at an independence ceremony in the presence of King Baudouin. This King Baudouin, by the way, he said that Leopold, the genocide of Belgium king, was a genius. He explicitly denounced the brutality which didn't exist until then. So he was incredible, courageous, uncompromising justice and freedom fighter. And I think Lumumba he was very threatening to Western powers. First, he was genuinely Pan-Africanist, nationalist, and we know what they do with this kind of people. Look at Gaddafi. And he wanted Congolese control over its own resources, and that field, in particular the uranium in Katanga, which was part of the atomic bomb projects of the US, where they got uranium to drop bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the other thing is that Lumumba turned to the Soviet Union for assistance. So that makes the CIA and Eisenhower government openly discuss his assassination. And I want to show a beautiful video of Lumumba's dignity shortly before he was murdered. Let's see this video. I think it's a very nice video.
He was first prime minister just hours ahead of his murder. Patrice Lumumba was assassinated months after freeing Congo from Belgian colonial rule. But let's take a step back. Here's Lumumba negotiating Congo's independence in Belgium. And here he is on the day of Congo's independence, giving an impromptu and fiery speech.
Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin, midi et soir, parce que nous étions des nègres.
The man in white is the Belgian King Baudouin. He was shocked that Lumumba dared to speak about the atrocities committed by Belgian colonialists. Baudouin and other Western leaders saw Lumumba as a threat to their power, and above all, they wanted to keep control of Congo's mineral resources. So they sided with his political enemies and orchestrated his assassination. Congolese and Belgian officers executed Lumumba on January 17, 1961. The assassination had the tacit consent of the US, who had previously planned to use the CIA to murder Lumumba. Lumumba's body was mutilated and dissolved in acid. Only a tooth, which a Belgian officer kept as a trophy, remained. It wasn't until 2022 that Belgium returned the tooth to his family and formally apologized.
Un homme a été assassiné pour ses convictions politiques.
But until today, no one was ever held accountable.
That has changed. And I think this is a beautiful, incredible piece of news. And one reason I want to say this is the global South calling the shots for justice and for liberation. I will never forget the day I went, João, you are going to be shocked with this. I went to a Labour Party movement in support of Brazil, and I had one of the British parliamentarians, Sara, saying that that Australian lawyer liberated Lula from prison. No, Lula has a legacy. Lula took 18 million people out of poverty, gave them food, dignity, house, a school. This is a legacy that Brazilian people will always remember, their first experience of being acknowledged as a civil society, as citizens. And this was the movement that liberated Lula. We had no Australian lawyer, by the way. I had people working with him, said it was he was really crappy in defending Lula. He was actually a problem in the defense team of Lula. And we had the British, someone who is a migrant herself, saying that an Australian lawyer liberated Lula. No, Lula has a legacy, and the Brazilian people liberated Lula against the DOJ, and Lula rose because of our own experience. So this is my message to the left-wing, compatible left-wing imperialists in the global north, that the global south has agency. The global south has anti-colonial struggles that went far before you could possibly imagine. Where Brazilians, we fought since our existence as Brazil against colonialism in different shapes of form. So the global south is rising. So this is actually, I really want to bring this because there is a left wing, particularly in the UK, who still thinks they are colonizers. You aren't.
Really well said, Sara. Yeah, I'm wondering very much so whether or not these initiatives through the ICJ are, marking a change, a sea change, because I think it's so ironic, or maybe not ironic, but it's sort of to your point about how even the leftists within the global north, sometimes they just can't come out of the colonial mentality. So they will say things like, in light of finally discovering, it seems like they just discovered that the US is breaking international law, and they'll be like, international law is dead. And it's like, no, the US, you just suddenly figured out that the US has been, they've been breaking international law this entire time. Doesn't mean that the law is dead. It just means we have to uphold the law,
There's an important twist here. It's not the ICJ making justice to the global south. It's the global south rising, pressuring those institutions to play a little bit of a different game. That's the twist.
And also, I think we can see this as well. And my watch will be a little bit about China. So, surprise, surprise, guys. But China also is using the idea of international law, and they've used international law quite frequently in their foreign policy, along with Russia as well, referencing the UN Charter, referencing international law as being upheld for all countries. It is part of the new strategy as we move into this multipolar world more clearly. we need the international law. We need to uphold it. We need to just apply it multilaterally. That's the key thing here. And so hopefully these examples that you're bringing forth to us, many will follow. Like, we hope many will follow, because this one is like 60 years, over 60 years old. You know what I mean? Like this Patrice Lumumba one. So there's like, can you imagine the amount of international law like initiatives that could be brought forth against the empire? I mean, we can't even count at this point how many that would be. So yeah, I'm certainly hoping that that means something. Joe, do you have anything else to add?
No, I mean, I was happy that Sara also brought a point about how, I think this is why this show is important, you know, initiatives that show how Global South is rising. You know, I think we have to keep this positive outcome. And I think, you know, small gestures like the one from Nicaragua, you know, can in the end have a butterfly effect. So I think this is what the Global South Rising should be about. You know, what are, you know, it's like the MST, you know, sending medicine to Cuba, you know. So I think this we need to be very attentive to these initiatives and, you know, highlight them too. It's important that we bring up all of the evil doing of the empire, but we should be cautious for ourselves not to have a colonial mentality as well and focus only on the bad things, and try to bring some of the innovations and good news and things that are happening in the Global South that point towards this multipolar world, that points towards this world that does not wait for Washington's consent, or Europe's consent for that matter, or Germany's, you know, which was very elucidating. I learned a lot by seeing in that translation. It's amazing to see how, you know, Germany has moved backwards. It's very unfortunate. You know, it's very unfortunate. They're closer and closer to where they were 60 years ago. It's terrible.
Absolutely.
And I think one thing that is part of the power game it's to disappropriate our possibilities by belittling us, you know, if you look at the American liberation movements, they were beautiful, they were fierce. You know, if you watch Malcolm X, if you watch Martin Luther King, if you watch the Black Panthers, these are highly revolutionary ideas, beautiful ideas from the core of America. And we think America has never had that. The same in Brazil. We study history without really acknowledging the revolutionary movement, because they want to make you believe it's useless. They want to make believe we don't have this with us. It's part of their game to be to suppress any contra-revolutionary action, thought, and self-esteem. And it's not like that. We have a lot of resistance, and they turn into effects. I do think so. And when they say, well, socialism is a failure, I haven't known. Imagine how Europe would be without the socialist fights and legacy. You know, it's a shame they abandoned it, but there is a huge legacy. I think Eric Hobsbawm was talking about this. You know, he was contradicting this argument by saying, no, you would be working on a factory today without the socialist fights. And it's unbelievable, the role of Germany. Karl Marx's house, where he was born, where great philosophers were born, where incredible emancipation, working class fights took place, where you had Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Liebknecht, and now doing this turn. So I think there is a huge legacy and possibility of a utopia, the tropical utopia. I think this is a lot of your theme, John. The tropical utopia we should never cease to have.
Yeah, I agree. You know, we need, and it's possible, and I think maybe it's closer than we think. It's maybe, you know, unless we get totally obliterated, I think it's in crisis that opportunities rise and opportunities for change, and I think that's where we need to be at. The empire is obviously desperate. You know, I've been saying that and repeating it every week. It's like when Nero took, ICE is basically Nero putting fire in Rome, right? They're imprisoning their own citizens. They're, as Ileana put it last week, burning through the missiles, getting weaker and weaker. So they're definitely taking a lot of very desperate moves. So are we going to wait for the next desperate move, or are we going to act and take this an opportunity, for Global South to rise and create a more equitable, multipolar world?
Well, that leads me to my watch, if that's okay, everybody. Yes, I think I am asking that question, whether or not, well, my question is a little bit more controversial. It is China leading the way to a new multipolar world? As we've been talking about here on this show, I mean, we've been talking about as a whole, like for a few years now, we've been talking about how the US imperialism is on the decline. But on this show itself, on my first watch, I did Why Aren't the Rats Jumping from the US Imperialist Titanic? Last week, it was talking about the diminishing power of the US's only perceived remaining pillar of dominance, which is military. So we've been talking about that a lot. But what I want to talk about this week is what could actually replace US imperialism, and whether or not China is leading the way to a new multipolar world, and also what that looks like. Two viral moments happened this week that are both showing a shift away from US dominance, one from the global north and the other from the global south. So the one from the global north is this one. Here, Politico did a poll on and the way that I'm going to talk about the way that they actually put this in context. But this poll is where they actually did a poll for 2,000 people from these four countries: Canada, Germany, France, and the UK. These are obviously very staunch US allies, and they asked basically which country is more dependable, China or the US. And all of these US staunch allies have chosen China. Canada was even at 57%, and the UK surprisingly was at 42%. The UK of all countries. Germany was at 40% too. So
the poodle. The
junior.
Hold on, Ileana, who was in the public opinion?
Yes, it was public opinion, but it's only 2,000 people per country. But, it is significant because it's random population people, right? And also we know that these are extremely propagandized populations. These are not like pro-China people. So the fact that they said this, I thought was very interesting. And we also have to remember that Politico, it's not like a leftist news outlet. It was bought over by Axel Springer SE, a European multinational and online media company based in Germany in 2021. It's a part of the multinational US propaganda, sort of like US imperialism propaganda machine. Okay, so this is not a leftist type of thing. And so, of course, because it's not a leftist type of thing, the way that they sort of position this in context is to blame Trump, obviously, right? They want to say that this, I'm going to quote from this article. It appears to be driven by Trump's disruption, not by a newfound stability in China. So they want to make sure that we understand it is because of Trump. It's not because of what China is doing. Guys, just in case you think it's about China's leadership or steady leadership, it's actually about Trump, And this is something that we talk a lot about, because it's like this lack of moral clarity about what imperialism is, what it looks like, how it exists as a system of rapacious, insatiable, genocidal devastation. Because, people in the global north have a really hard Understandably so, right? A really hard time accepting that to be the true nature of US imperialism or imperialism in general. And so they have a lack of accountability here. And, we see this across the board in terms of propaganda. It's either just Trump, it's just Israel, it's just Netanyahu, it's just Epstein, but really it's part of the entire depraved imperial system. So this leads me to the second viral moment of this week, because this one, and I'm going to pull it up and hopefully I'm going to manage to do this well. I'm going to play this. It's pretty self-explanatory, but for me, this is more the viewpoint from the global South when we're looking at the shift away from US dominance. So let me see if I can make this work. Is it working? Can you hear it? No one can hear it. Okay.
Yeah, you because you need to unmute. Yeah. Oh no, unmute. Maybe turn it on, the sound.
Did it not
Or
work?
you can read it.
Oh, I should really try to pull it up, because he's very passionate about it, and we sort of need to.
Maybe you just don't have it loud enough. Just go to the.
I'm gonna try it with this
audio.
other computer and see if it works.
Okay.
So sorry about this.
No worries.
Here we go. Here.
Acted in 2020, Western countries condemned us, they sanctioned us, they call it a violation to human rights. But here's what I want to say. Since enacting this law, Hong Kong's economy has recovered, tourism has flourished, the people finally feel safe again. And what's more important is that I really want to ask, what moral authority does the United States, a country that's ruled by the Epsteins, have over my country, a country that has lifted over 800 million people out of poverty? What moral authority does Britain, a country that arrested over 12,000 of its own people for posting online, have to lecture us about civil liberties? And what moral authority do NATO countries that preach human rights in this very chamber, while turning a blind eye on the Zionist genocide in Gaza, have to tell us what justice looks like? We will not be silenced by nations that treat human rights as bargaining chips, a tool of foreign policy. We will not accept lectures from governments that use human rights as weapons while their own hands are stained with the blood of Palestinians and Iranians they choose to forget. And we will not rest until every nation in this chamber is held to the same standard, until hypocrisy crumbles, genocide is met with action, and peace is no longer a word we speak, but a world we build. Thank you, Mr. President.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
really
Please send me this link.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Who is this guy? What's his name?
He's Dominic Lee, a member of Hong Kong's Legislative Council.
Very brave and
this is at the United Nations Human Rights Council on Wednesday, March 18th. So this is in response to the Western criticism of the Hong Kong national security law, which, as we know, every country basically does have some sort of national security law. And Hong Kong needed to pass one after the Hong Kong protests and the Colour Revolution that happened, because it hadn't had one before, due to it being like a post-colonial country of the British Empire, right? So I think it is significant that it's a Hong Kong voice, because Hong Kong has been such a useful weapon for Western US propaganda against China, really culminating in 2019. The 2019 protests ended in the Hong Kong protests ended in 2019, but that was a US-backed Colour Revolution. And since then, even though we have ample evidence that that is a Colour Revolution, a US-backed Colour Revolution, Jimmy Lai is actually in prison, has been charged. Western media uses that again and again to try to destabilize China and try to manufacture consent. So I think it's really important that speech went viral this week, because I think it's a sentiment that is really readily understood in the global South, because for us, the atrocities of the empire did not start on October 7, but in the past few years, we're really seeing so many people awakened to the atrocities committed by imperialism. But instead of imagining or discovering a world without imperialism, without capitalism, without military might, sanctions, and other acts of wars being the only tools to fight the injustices we are witnessing, we are seeing sort of in the zeitgeist, as they're awakening, they're still in this colonial mentality and this imperialist mentality that demands that China act in the same imperialist way of the West, you know?
And there's a very interesting element, Ileana. It's that we don't often see Chinese representatives talking so emotionally. I mean, their diplomacy tend to be gentle, soft, subtle, measured, and they avoid spectacles all the time. It's about precision. The whole Chinese culture is about that. And then to see someone so precise and emotionally driven, it feels like it means more than if this was the standard. You know?
Right. If this was the US, kind of
I'm gonna make a very, very crazy metaphor. But like when in Swan Lake, you have the black swan and the white swan. They basically do the same steps and the very similar choreography. It's only about the emotional emphasis. So the black swan is unapologetic, is aggressive, is fierce. And the white swan, you're always seeing the subtle measure. But when the white swan renders itself to the prince, it's such an explosive moment by just leaning her hands. So it's, you know, there is this poetic thing about it, that it means more when you change the style, you know, and when this is just a constant style. I don't know if I explained myself. It made sense for anyone who doesn't like ballet. Yeah.
I love ballet, so I totally understand what you're saying. Yes, and it means more. He's simply saying facts as well. You know, he talks about the Epstein class as well. He's just simply laying out the facts that we know in the global south. This is not new, but it is new that this moment is sort of going viral right now. And I think it's like a significant moment as well in light of, like I'm saying, Western leftists, they consider themselves leftists, going, this genocide, this war, all these are US imperialist constructs, but they're like, why isn't China doing anything? Why isn't China coming back and fighting the US?
China does, but in a different, subtle way.
Yes,
without announcing it. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, first of all,
China and Iran, China buys 90% of Iran stuff, you know, like so China does a lot more than it meets our Western eyes, but in a very different way.
Exactly. I mean, China did buy 90% of Iran oil. It would have Iran survived all these years without China? You know, you could argue it would have been extremely much harder. So, but the fact of the matter is, and this is China's, I'm not going to speak for China, okay? I'm not part of the CCP, but I would just say that from analyzing what China is doing, it is what I believe too, that you can't fight imperialism by using the same imperialist tools. And China is making this very, very clear, because if we remember, from the two sessions, the press conference that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, he responded to Trump's proposal of a G2 world order led by the US and China at the two sessions. He said that China will never accept a so-called G2. The world cannot and should not be shaped by just two countries. There are more than 190 countries on this planet. Their voices must not be ignored, nor should their rights be overridden. So he's saying China will not follow the old path where a strong country seeks dominance. We reject any framework that divides the world into blocks or spheres of influence. The future of humanity must be decided by all countries together. China supports an equal and orderly multipolar world, not a bipolar one. The idea of a G2 is outdated. It repeats the mistakes of great power rivalry and goes against the trend of our times. So this is a very strong statement from the foreign minister Wang Yi, and it echoes very much so the global civilization initiative that Xi Jinping announced in March of 3 years ago. So in March of 2023, he actually announced it. And I think it's very interesting here because, again, you know, it's like China is subtle, but not subtle, because if you guys remember, do you guys remember this Joseph Borrell situation where he talked about the garden? Do you guys remember this? So basically, you don't remember it. So Joseph Borrell, which is the former EU foreign policy chief, he actually said this, and I quote, "Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. Everything works. It is the best combination of political freedom, economic prosperity, and social cohesion that the humankind has been able to build. The three things together. The rest of the world is not exactly a garden. Most of the rest of the world is a jungle, and the jungle could invade the garden." So do you remember these remarks? They were very controversial at the time, rightly so, because it's that old European, colonial mentality. However, several months later, Xi Jinping made this speech where he introduced the Global Civilization Initiative. And in this speech, he says something quite different. And I think it is a response to those comments. He says, "A single flower does not make spring, while 100 flowers in full blossom bring spring to the garden. As the future of all countries are closely connected, tolerance, coexistence, exchanges, and mutual learning among different civilizations play an irreplaceable role in advancing humanity's modernization process and making the garden of the world's civilizations flourish." And then here he talks about the Global Civilization Initiative. So you can see, just like really briefly, it is 5 proposals within the initiative that are really showing this multilateral push, right? We advocate the respect for the diversity of civilizations. We advocate the common values of humanity. We advocate the importance of inheritance and innovation of civilizations. We advocate robust international people-to-people exchanges and cooperation, and we are ready to work together with the international community to open up a new prospect of enhanced exchanges and understanding amongst different peoples and better interactions and integration of diversified countries. Together, we can make the garden of world civilizations colorful and vibrant. So I know that we have talked about this a lot, Sara. We talked about this last week, that China uses a lot of metaphor and it can feel very platitudes, full of platitudes, and should we take this seriously? But the thing is, we have to remember that this is the Global Civilization Initiative after the Belt and Road Initiative, which focuses on infrastructure and fostering economic ties, after the Global Development Initiative, which is about sustainable development, after the Global Security Initiative, which proposes a security framework based on dialogue and collective stability, and after the Global Governance Initiative, which seeks to reform international institutions to be more inclusive of developing countries. So when we put all these initiatives together, it's not just platitudes. It's specifically just talking about the deeper, more philosophical questions of how do we peacefully coexist, and how do we actually do that with the respect for each country. Each country needs to have their own path to modernization. And I think this is really, really key, because China knows what it's like to lift itself from the pit of despair after the century of humiliation, right? Not by emulating Europe. Yes, they took a lot of things, You know, like they learned a lot of things from every country basically in the world, but they didn't give up. Like they didn't emulate or try to be European. They didn't give up their own cultural identity and historical context. And this is what they're advocating for everybody. This really should be the model for a new multipolar world. It's not a G2 or another G1,
Yeah.
you know.
And that's
and just
doesn't make that's evidence that in China is not an empire trying to. It's a huge evidence of it, and I think it goes back to China history, because when China did the revolution, they acknowledged that they had a huge rural population, and that their Marxism was a Marxism very different from in other places. So I think this is to be in touch with material conditions is something very ingrained in Confucianism, in Taoism, and in Marxism. So I think it was a very interesting fusion of both. But I think João is far more.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I think João is far more reversed on China. But I have a real provocation for you both guys. Do we need to develop, because this is China doesn't want
that. Before we go into that, let me just finish by saying this one part. Sorry, no, just by this one part. This is where I got this from. Radhika Desai. She wrote she's a Marxist economist, a geopolitical economist, and so she wrote this articles. It's really interesting. It's about how it is it looks at it through the lens of Marxist-Leninism. But I just want to read out this part that she writes about it, which I think is also going to add to this conversation that you're about to say, which is here. She says here, what the GCI is saying is simply that all human civilizations embody their own versions of human progress. So this is, you know,
beautiful.
This is kind of what you were sort of referring to.
Yeah.
The advancement of the forces of production, the advancement of human knowledge of nature, society, and self, the advancement of political structures, social forms, and cultural expressions, and much else besides. While they all have limitations, above all in the forms of oppressions they retain, and they all have advances to make, these limitations will not be removed, and these advances will not be made in conditions where their achievements are denied, as has been the case so far, thanks to the dominance of Western, and that is to say, capitalist and imperialist culture in which all others are not civilized. So I think that does kind of speak to your point here, right? Like, as in, who determines what is civilized? Who determines what is development? Each country needs to do that, not the West, not an outside force. So.
Yeah. I'd like to comment on that a little bit. And I have here a book that I've read recently, and it's about the idea around ecological civilization, which is a concept that has been developed in China and is part of their quinquennial plans. In fact, Xi Jinping adopted this slogan that was rooted already some 20 years ago, that is, clear waters and green mountains are mountains of gold and silver. And this is the principle behind the idea of ecological civilization, which is a concept that draws on Confucianism and Taoism, but that rejects the Western notion of nature being something to be conquered. And it's framed within the Marxist and socialist frameworks, where ecological destruction is something that is, for capitalism, seen as inevitable, as a byproduct. It's a byproduct of it. And it argues that socialist planning can align with economic growth with ecological balance. And I think this is very important as we project the future and we project a more multipolar, equitable, and therefore ecological world. And I think, often China is criticized because, it's the largest CO2 emitter and it didn't sign this treaty or that treaty. But what is behind the ecological civilization? What is really happening in China as far as that is concerned? And what can the global South learn from it so that we have we can adapt this to our own realities, you know. So in their 5-year quinquennial plans, as well as in the more long-term plans, the idea of an ecological civilization has been adopted already for over a decade. So each time there is a new meeting, every 5-year meeting, new objectives are put in place to create a more ecological civilization. I don't know how much you guys know about that, but China has been leading the technology of greening deserts. You know, since the 1970s, they've been creating a Great Wall to contain desertification. And a lot of these technologies are now being applied in Africa and around the world. China has also developed the sponge cities, right? Which are cities that are able to deal with climate change, absorbing water. And many cities, model cities, have been constructed from scratch or adapted in China to deal with these changes. And we have so much to learn in Brazil, but also in India. In so many countries, we have issues with climate change, with flash floods. You know, our cities are not ready for that. So there's a lot to be learned there. And I think this is a pathway towards a civilization that not only is good for humans, but for the whole planet to survive, right? So I think it's something I'd like to bring that maybe into a future watch. We can discuss a little bit more. But as you were speaking, I couldn't stop thinking of this book that I read recently. And, you know, they have a plan to make the peak carbon emissions will be by 2030, right? And by 2060, they're going to eliminate carbon. A lot of people in the West criticize, it's going to take too long, it's going to be too late. And in the end, they're not doing anything. So in fact, China is systemically working towards this as a reality, not as a, nice discourse at the UN where you sound super ecological and then you don't apply it. You know, many of the Chinese cities now have electrified completely the transportation. You know, some cities where in the 80s, even in the 90s, you could barely walk without a mask, now are completely clean, you know. So it shows what is possible, you know. It shows also, I think, even the agricultural reform China has been doing with smaller plots of land, not this huge capitalist system we have in Brazil that exploits and destroys the land and does not empower the people that are in the field. They're exiting the fields, right? So I think the idea behind an ecological civilization is something, we as the global South should adopt, and I think it complements everything that you were saying, but from this environmental point of view.
That's thank you for those insights, João. I also want to just point out, last week we covered the code, the new what's it called, ecological code. They've actually put together 12,000 different papers into one legally binding ecological code. And what's really interesting about the way China does things is that in that show, we also covered the ethnic unity progress law that they also passed during the 2 sessions. I read through that a little bit more thoroughly this week. And I just noticed how whenever they pass a law, they put in not every, but there were 65 articles. And so many of the articles, when they're talking about unity or a national unity or national cohesion, they talk about environment. It's like it is part and parcel of how they view the entire country. So it's like you have responsibility to your environment, and it's part of so that's kind of the thing that I think is really interesting, to integrate these laws across many, many, many different initiatives. And that's how you make it a reality, rather than just putting it to one side and then compartmentalizing it, right? So yeah, I think that's really amazing insight, and I feel hopeful about it. I don't know how you guys feel.
I'd like. I don't know if Sara wants to say anything, but I have a positive note for us to end to.
Yeah, no, sometimes I think this, it's very interesting, the China solution. It's because I think that has to do with China's strategic thinking. Look around us. We have a fight that is not only to be socialist, but to be socialist, you will have to defeat the geopolitical context of predatory capitalism. So I think China was absolutely aware they could not really totally be socialist in their own terms, or in the classical terms, or imperialist terms. We need to rise, but we need to be, we shouldn't be naive about the world surrounding us.
And I think it's more like, I would just say it's just this pragmatic, you know, people talk about China being pragmatic, but it's just like common sense. Like, you cannot just be, oh, I'm just communist now, and therefore, you know, it's a process. Everything is a process. Like, there's no such thing as just using an academic idea and then just ignoring 1.4 billion. Like, there's no system that can work without trial and error, without like implementation, without contradictions. So I think like the Western view, the Western accusations tend to be very academic and about like semantics rather than like really bothering to explain what's happening.
But that leads me to a question which I have no answer. Yeah, and that's a question that I had when I went to the Yanomami people, semi-isolated people. They don't accumulate anything. They would chase the food they eat on the day. They would do their own rituals. I think there is a horrific clash between the capital and their lifestyle. So I think when Marxism, and this is a critic which could be very badly fundamented because I'm not a great connoisseur, but is a more intuitive thinking. Do every society need to get into an accumulation process? I'm not so sure. I would prefer to believe not. I prefer to believe that we can have ways of life where there is no accumulation whatsoever, you know, but yeah, maybe it's really development to have 2 TVs, to have a car, to have, you know, all those goods. I think we should be in a world where this is also a possibility. You know, you have one solution, but you may have also the possibility made to live a very simple life, and you know, but
right?
Rich. You can have a culturally rich life, and maybe not aspire to a development. So
I think that I just want to posit again, like this idea of what socialism can sort of bring is that not this endless consumerism. That is really a byproduct of a capitalist. Even though you were in a circumstance where you met like indigenous people, maybe in an enclave for some of it, and then opened up to sort of a capitalist world. The fact that there is not a centralized planning system that allows like people to have what they need, you know, that's socialism, right? To have what you need, and not to have this like either hoarding of accumulation of wealth, like you're saying, or nothing. You know, like socialism can allow sort of that thing where it's like people do actually have enough, and therefore this indoctrination.
Do you know what they have that we don't? Time passes so slowly there. The sense of time in those places are completely different from everything that you know. You know, think about these people crossing the desert. You know, I think there is a type of living that goes outside of socialism and outside of capitalism and outside of everything. And maybe we should just acknowledge this as a possibility too, you know?
But they're not outside. I guess that's my point.
They are resistance. They are a resistance.
Enclaves within a system.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, there's people still, although they're a very, to Sarah's point, you know, they're certainly a minority in the world, but there are people living isolated, somewhat in harmony with nature, that are outside of the system, right? I mean, in Brazil, we have at least, we know of at least, you know, a dozen, but, you know,
200. We have 200 semi-isolated people and isolated people over.
They're still in a country that has a system, right? But anyway, I think we're talking about different things. Like one is the philosophical thing of like there are certain ways of living, and you can like. I mean, I also come from Malaysia, and there are certain areas that are not developed, as we would say, and there is a different quietness and a different time. Like you're saying, time passes differently.
Yeah,
but that's
I mean,
like an overall governmental system and a multilateral world. You know, that is.
Yeah, I think it's the duty of the multilateral world to accept these forms of living.
Well, that's what this is saying. This is saying literally that your heritage, your culture, your diversity needs to be allowed. It has to be an emphasis when we're talking about peaceful coexistence. We cannot be imposing our own values on different countries. Like
exactly. I mean, to that point, I'd like to say, you know, that a multipolar ecological world should not be about a political power shift from west to east. You know, that's not it. It's about shifting from, you know, extraction to restoration across all centers of power. You know, and I think the global south has the land, has the biodiversity, has traditional knowledge, as Sara brought, the Yanomami, you know, has demographic energy and lots of people to lead this transition, you know. So I think what is lacking right now is the will to finance, you know, fair governments, recognition that ecological stewardship is a gift to the whole planet that deserves to be compensated and not just exploited. And I think, you know, to bring it back to the China's ecological civilization model, it offers a blueprint, if not for the whole world, certainly for China. But I think the most powerful version of this vision is that a global South could write its own ecological future. You know, drawing on indigenous, on African, on Latin American, and on Chinese wisdom simultaneously. You know, I've visited many indigenous communities. I've worked with many of them, filmed them, studied their ways, and there's a lot about communal living there to be learned. However, I don't see us, you know, all going back to the forest today. So we need to create a transitional phase into an ecological civilization where we start to value less overconsumption. You know, I was able to interview Ailton Krenak, who's a very well-known Brazilian indigenous voice. And
philosopher. He brings indigenous
writer, yeah. And he said something, look, the world has enough for you to have one house and one car and travel and have leisure. But if you want to have, you know, 3-4 houses, a yacht, you know, a private plane, we're going to destroy the planet. And somehow right now, as is, even the people that are in poverty, they're aiming towards that. So we're not aiming towards having, you know, a balanced life that fulfills our needs. We're aiming to have everything, to consume, to exchange our phones every 2 years. We're forced to do that. You know, that needs to end. You know,
I mean, that system, that capitalism, you know, it creates that system for us.
Yeah, it's a system of dependency. You know, it's for a product, it's called planned obsolescence. You know, your phone is made so it lasts 2 years and you have to replace it. You know, it wasn't always like that. You know, my grandmother, she had a fridge that worked for over 40 years. You know, there's no way you're going to buy a fridge now in 40 years it's going to be working. And that was done deliberately. So we need to move towards a different society. And I hope we here in Global South Rising in the future can talk more about these alternatives, and especially about things that are happening in the Global South that point towards an ecological civilization.
Yes, we absolutely can. I mean, there's so many things. Like, you know, I didn't mean to make it sound like it was a conflict in terms of the way that you're the type of life that you're describing versus a socialist society. It's not a conflict between those things. No. The conflict is between an imperialist system and what you're talking about. That will never be. They will never be able to rest or have anything like that. if we continue on this imperialist path. So just to be clear on that. But I think I think we've managed to somewhat end on a very positive note. Hopefully horrible things will not happen this next week and we can just keep riding the high, but things will happen. Let's face it. But
we'll be here to look at them and see if there's any potential positive outlook.
Yes, good point. Thank you so much. Someone is Ode to John Trudell is just asking, did we have any discussion on what's happening in Ecuador? That's not even past my radar, so I will look into that maybe for the time.
I don't know if he's saying this, but I think the US has launched an initiative we discussed last week that Ecuador, I don't know, it's about the FBI headquarters in Ecuador, but it could be something else. But thank you, John. We're going to look into that and bring it next week.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for watching. And thank you, Sara and Joe. I don't know. We should have a sign-off. We need a sign-off tagline. The Global South is rising.
Global South is rising.
Okay. Bye, everyone. See you guys next week. And thank you, everyone, for commenting, writing. Oh, and please, subscribe, share, that sort of thing. Help us out. Okay. Bye.